Means Monday is Casual Monday. Tuesday, Casual Tuesday. Wednesday, Casual Hump Day. Thursday, Casual Thurs. That's what we call it. And Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
It is Friday, February 28th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. We are jam-packed today, ladies and gentlemen, even though it's a casual Friday. Joining us in studio, Brandon Sutton of The Discourse, also known as Pretty Bad Lefty on Twitter. Then we will get a brief phone call from Dave Weigel, the Washington Post/CIA, who will be giving us an update on what's going on in South Carolina. As you know, there's a primary there tomorrow. And then joining us in studio from the Reply Guys, or, other things, her career, Kate Willett will be with us. Meanwhile, the Mad King insists coronavirus is a deep state ploy. And our total lack of preparedness is all in your head. And speaking of which, a Health and Human Services whistleblower says that it was HHS workers who may be the cause of some of the coronavirus outbreak in this country. Whoops. And on the eve of the South Carolina primary, the day's eve of the South Carolina primary, Joe Biden up by near double digits, apparently. Meanwhile, Super Tuesday, just a couple of days away, polls show Bernie up in Massachusetts, of all places, and with a 2-1 lead in California. Meanwhile, a Warren-supporting super PAC makes a $9 million Super Tuesday buy. And one of the DNC superdelegates promoting a brokered convention turns out to be a big Republican donor because of his lobbying business. What are you gonna do? The SEIU has committed now $150 million to mobilizing low-propensity voters in the general election. Turkey is getting pulverized in Syria. It's now opened its border and is sending Syrian refugees to Europe. Meanwhile, Erdogan is slamming India for Muslim massacres there. Idaho bans trans people from correcting their gender on their birth certificates, which I imagine was a huge problem in Idaho. Must have been very difficult for people there to deal with that. And the new IRS taxpayer advocate is a 20-year veteran of a corporate accounting firm, using some of that great experience in helping taxpayers to help taxpayers. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. I should say that the last taxpayer advocate was basically a person who worked with legal aid, had a background there, and started the first low-income taxpayer clinic of its kind in the U.S. And this is sort of to balance that out, where KMPG is almost like a clinic, but for super high-income people and corporations, and therefore that person is better suited to help tax-paying clients.
It's important to respect everyone's lived experience.
Exactly. So it's a little bit of balance. Right, Brandon?
I mean, you have to be able to see both sides of the issue. I think that's the important part here. Sometimes the tax code needs to help poor people. Sometimes it needs to help rich people. In this case, I mean, when it starts helping poor people, that'll be great. So
there you go. I mean, so you're basically saying what this is an investment in potential future justice.
I mean, there's a concept in like psychology called moral balancing. It's like that, but at the social level. You have to balance out the immorality of helping the poor by with the morality of helping rich people. So
I didn't know there was a name for that concept, but I think I was mentioning the other day that when I quit law school, I was determined to also quit smoking to sort of balance those things out, and it took about 20 years, but I did it eventually.
I'm not going to quit smoking, but one day.
I understand. Well, maybe you should quit law school, and then they'll force you to. Okay. Folks, just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member by going to jointhemajority.com. Also, check out the AM Quickie. It is a great, what's that? Brendan said it's doing gangbusters, and he sort of did it half under his breath, so I couldn't understand what he was saying. But it is doing gangbusters, apparently. So check that out. We have it out the door by 8 a.m. unless there is some type of major technical screw up. And it is a great way to sort of keep track of the news in a very brief amount of time. So I know you'll enjoy it. Check it out, amquickie.com. Just a little bit of house cleaning. We are going to be doing Super Tuesday live here. And we'll be covering it. We'll have we may even have a whiteboard. We've been talking about having a whiteboard here, so that makes it pretty official when you have the whiteboard. So, Brent, let's. The race is what it is. We're going to talk to Dave Weigel in a bit in terms of like what's happening in South Carolina. There was a poll that came out today that shows Bernie up in Massachusetts on Super Tuesday. Incidentally, if you're in the Worcester area over the weekend, John Benjamin and I, two Worcester natives, are headed up there to, I guess we're going to do some type of show for canvassers. So if you're thinking about canvassing this weekend and you want to head to Worcester, Massachusetts, which is the heart of the Commonwealth and has an incredibly, the metro area there is enormous.
I went to a cool weed dispensary there last time I was there.
I didn't even realize that. I have not been to that, and I will probably check it out just from a sociological perspective.
I went to college in Worcester.
You did?
Not that one though. The one in Ohio. So they're pronounced the same, spelled entirely differently.
That's correct.
Different state too.
It's not so crazy. There are 11 colleges in Worcester. I'm not going to get into my Worcester boosterism, but that's an opportunity for folks.
Blister. Sorry.
Let's talk about this. Is the big story right now is this whole sort of dynamic about, the question that was asked at the debate, and then this New York Times story that has contacted 93 of the 770 superdelegates, and the majority of those 93, I guess, or a significant number, said that they are, at least some of them, are willing to, in their words, destroy the party to stop Bernie Sanders.
Damage the party.
Damage the party, destroy the party. Now, if you're like this apparently the story in The Intercept, if you're a lobbyist and you have some Republican clients and you're also maxing out to Republicans, like it may not be that hard to understand why you might do that. It's a harder question to understand why that person is a superdelegate, or maybe the answer is more disturbing. But broadly speaking, what is your sense and your take of all this?
I guess going in order, I think that it would absolutely destroy the Democratic Party because I think that let's say Bernie Sanders gets the plurality of votes. He comes in at 48% of the delegates after the primary. And he goes into the convention, all the energy, all people there are excited to vote for him. And they just say, well, you know what, we're going to coalesce around a Pete Buttigieg. hopefully not Biden, or Pete Buttigieg, a Bloomberg, even a Warren, you now have 48% of people who voted feeling as though like their vote was just thrown out. And I think that there is this tendency among people who are getting themselves amped up right now to go like, oh, well, it's within the rules. The rules say they can do this. This is totally within the rule books, but no one cares about the rules. Right. It's like that. Like that's, the only time you start referencing, in my opinion, the only time you start referencing rules like that is when you're getting ready to cheat. Is when you're getting ready to do something incredibly immoral. Rather not cheat. You're getting ready to do something that's going to upset people, and you want to have an excuse for why people should not feel aggrieved by it. At the same time, though, I don't think they have the courage to do that. I don't think they're going to have the courage to destroy the party, at least not the Democrats, maybe the Republican donors who are yelling. Definitely they would. But like the people who are actually higher up Dems who, even if they are not, let's say, progressive or liberal, they're center-right Dems. I mean, they are not going to have the courage to come out and explicitly state, "Hey, we want to disenfranchise. We want to disenfranchise the 48% of voters and just have them stay home." I think it's much more likely that Bernie will be the nominee, and they will just try to sabotage him on the back end.
That is exactly the way I feel too, and I would say, like, look, yes, it is the rules. Bernie in 2016, the fact is that he was playing the same game. Everybody's going to try, and particularly at this stage in the, before, let's face it, the reason why people think Bernie is going to win is because of what he's doing in the polls and because he has the most robust, combined with organic, because, Bloomberg probably has a more robust in terms of dollars, machine built for the rest of the race. Nobody else even comes close. I mean, it's Bloomberg and Sanders, and Bloomberg's are all paid. I'm sure there's some people who genuinely, deep in their heart, have always dreamt of a Bloomberg presidency.
I would never want to meet those people or spend any time alone with them.
I think they're probably not interested in meeting you either.
Just like legit psychos. Not even racist. Just like legit. Like,
exactly. And so, but there's, we haven't actually, I don't know what percentage of delegates have been awarded at this point, probably, I don't know, like 3% or something, somewhere around the death rate of coronavirus, at least if we believe the numbers coming out of China, which I don't. But that's it. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it is the rules. The party, if everybody decides they can do it, it's certainly within their rights to do it. I'm not even convinced that it's necessarily immoral to deny a plurality of the people. But the fact is, and I don't care who would come in with the plurality. I think it would have been the same situation if it had happened with Clinton. I mean, when they were talking about the superdelegates being the difference, for two candidates that lacked a majority in 2016, I thought that was wrong too. The superdelegates should be a rubber stamp unless there's a situation where it's like on June 15th, somebody gets indicted for, murdering their spouse. And there's like sort of wide, broad acceptance that like, we can't have that person be our nominee. And at least we have a legal, because the fact of the matter is that the rules are there so that there is actually a non-actionable process in which you could address a situation like that. I think from a practical standpoint, it doesn't matter who's in the lead. And I think, maybe if the lead is razor thin, I mean, you said 48%. That to me is a slam dunk. But the real question is going to be like, so I'm looking at this, Nate Silver did a multiple scenarios. What if, of what happens from here on in? And one is scenario one, and Matt, I sent you the link here so you can put this up on the thing. Scenario one is after a big Biden win in South Carolina. Now, I don't know what constitutes a big win. People are anticipating maybe a low double-digit win for him there. It used to be like 30%.
Oh, yeah, he came in real high in South Carolina, and they've been slowly chipping away at that. But I mean, I don't think it's out of possibility he comes in and wins South Carolina by 10, 12%. That just seems like, it was a big gap, and Bernie closed a lot of it. But
yep, it's true. And so here's the first one right there. This is the first scenario one, and even there, right? You have Bernie with 39. This is the best case scenario for a close second place finisher, 39 to 29%. Now that's where it starts to get murky. In my mind, 10%. Like, I'm sorry, if someone's at essentially 40%, I think to essentially appoint for even though it's the delegates who appoint it, somebody who's coming in with a 10% less, you're just inviting a loss in the general election. And surely that candidate would know it. And surely all of these Democratic superdelegates would know it. And I think you're right. It would be much more efficient for them to just say Bernie wins, and then we'll see you in December.
Let it be a self-fulfilling prophecy. They'll pretend as though the negative coverage, the negative backbiting, the subtle jabs and sabotaging had no effect on why he's losing, right? Because they do the same thing for Medicare for all. You'll have many different think pieces decrying how bad it'll be, decrying how we have to save Obamacare. Then when Medicare for all starts slipping in public popularity, they go see, we told you, It's not popular. And it's well, yeah, but you're missing the intervening issue here, the fact that you've made it less popular. So, but what I think is going to occur, and at least when you see numbers like this, is that it's not feasible. It would be a mask off moment for Democratic Party to say you know what, Sanders, we see that people like him. Not only do people like him, but even using the logic of the other candidates for why they should be appointed, he is the unity candidate. Let's be honest, he is a lot of the major candidates out there. He has the most overlap with being people's second choice. So it seems even with these numbers, he might lose South Carolina, Florida, that appointing him or allowing him to be the nominee would not be deleterious to the morale of the voters themselves, just the higher ups. And so I think that speaking from it from that level, it's not even about the people who will stay home because they're Bernie or bust people. It's about actually framing this as, well, Bernie is the unity candidate. The people who are not getting behind him are a very small minority of people who just happen to have actual material stakes in him becoming president. Right. But everyone else, I think a lot of Democratic voters we've seen polls that show a lot of Democratic voters for Biden or Warren or Buttigieg, they're just party functionaries. They're going to vote for whoever the nominee is. If their preferred person doesn't win, the turnout might be a little bit lower, but not to the degree that that a Bernie Sanders presence, a lack of Bernie Sanders would be. And so I think that really it's coming down to the fact that can the Democratic Party, or rather, can Bernie Sanders make the accurate assessment and the accurate claim that, hey, you know what, he is the unity candidate. Everyone would be there's going to be the least amount of people who are dissatisfied with him being the nominee than any other case here.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if there is I wonder if there is an audience even for that outside of the circles of people who really wouldn't want him anyways. The whole unity candidate thing, I think, not just in the context of Sanders, it's just I don't think the average Democratic voter perceives this huge riff that we're all aware of because we're watching, Neera Tanden and Dave Sirota go at it, and it feels like it's a huge. I just think that the rest of that's why I thought Warren's I'm the unity candidate didn't resonate with anybody, because people were just wait, what do you mean?
No,
is there a fight?
I don't think the average voter perceives that as being a problem, but there is certainly a fraction of the base, and the base that likes Bernie Sanders the least, which is professional class, suburban, liberal voters who watch MSNBC all the time and kind of have MSNBC brain, who vote regularly and are an important constituency.
Yeah, I don't know if they see, I'm not convinced that they see there to be, that I think they're just I want to get rid of Trump.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's, that point you're making right now is exactly why it would be so deleterious for the Democratic Party to come out so aggressively against Sanders, right? Because I think your average Democrat who's just half paying attention to what's going on, doesn't really know the rules about, super delegates, doesn't know the way the actual delegate count is breaking down right now. They just see Bernie won the first 3 states. I don't know. I think that that particular person is fine with Bernie Sanders. Like,
Yeah.
they're fine with them. Like, they just want to get Trump out of office. They want to get, they want to close the book on this like negative chapter of their life. They want to go back to brunch, and Bernie's a way to do that too. And so like the more Democratic Party sabotages that, the bigger the schism between like their voting base and their establishment is going to become. And so like that's something they have to safeguard against too. So I mean, they're being pulled in two directions. Like you can go against Bernie, but you're going to lose a lot of the voters who are just not going to understand why you don't like him so much.
Yep.
Because, not to borrow some of your phrasing, but the Democratic Party, in many ways, they sewed a suit for Bernie Sanders. It's like if you're just like an average Democratic voter, and you're not really entrenched and steeped in like what they're actually up to, and in capitalism, neoliberalism, you think they're the party of women and people of color and like workers and providing health care and Obama, and then you see someone like Bernie Sanders come in, he's like, yeah, I want to provide health care. I marched with Martin King Jr. It's like I was doing X, Y, and Z in the 70s. You're like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like that's exactly what I stand for. And so the party coming out antagonistically against that is a bad look for them, because it's like, well, why are you so against this? And the argument that it's because it's just not practical doesn't appeal to anybody.
Right. I think a big part of what they're trying to do, and they have not been able to really successfully do it, is to find the thing that they think will resonate with those people. And I think, to the extent that anything has, it is, I think, still a taste in people's mouths from the 2016 election, and that's why he does the cohort where he does the least well is with suburban women, which, that's a hugely important cohort. We saw them, come out in 2018 in the big numbers, but I think a lot of that is an anti-Trump sentiment. And in one respect, that's why what's happening with coronavirus, just to sort of tacked over, we're going to obviously come back and talk about at least South Carolina when we talk to Weigel for a moment. But that's why I think the coronavirus is one of those things that in the general, right? Like, I don't think it's going to help necessarily any Democrat in the primaries. I think some people are suggesting it might help Warren but I don't know that. I don't know that idea that she is the wonkiest of all the candidates is necessarily really that heavy on people's minds. I think it still ends up being like, we got to beat Donald Trump. A lot of people in the media have a very weird relationship with Warren. Like it feels like there's been more so than Pete and Biden. There's been, at least among the pundit class of like center leftist, thinkfluencers rather, that they have like supplanted their ego with Warren's candidacy, and they identify very strongly with her. And so like, I'll go back to the debate before last. I did not watch the last debate. I couldn't do it to myself. And, going into that debate. That was very smart.
Going into that debate, I was like, no matter how Warren's going to do, that people are going to be saying, Warren did great. And she did do great in the debate before last. But it's becoming clear that there is a desperation amongst a certain minority of her supporters, and they may be overrepresented in the media, and pretending like she's still viable to the degree that she's not. And so like so I think that's coloring a lot of commentary about her in a way that's not necessarily like.
My sense is that what we're seeing is, and it's indicative of the failure of her campaign, I think, and I'm talking from a political standpoint, because I happen to be a fan of her as a candidate, as a senator, and as a would-be candidate. But it's been clear that, I think the first time I was introduced to the idea of like policy is personnel, or personnel is policy, was somehow through, reading about her, over the past 10, 15 years. That when it comes to doing public facing politics, there's a huge deficit there. And she's picked the wrong people. And frankly, there's been too many gaffes that I think make me feel comfortable that she could beat Donald Trump. I know everybody says like, you're not supposed to think about who can beat, but I'm sorry, that's what everybody's thinking about. And also I think from a legislative perspective, like there just seems to be a misunderstanding of what her value proposition is on some level. And I think what's happening now is that there are other people who are now sort of been brought into the campaign who are saying, you got to get back to that point of just being you, and have people discover that you are the best that the establishment of the party is going to get in this cycle. Because if it's not Warren, it's going to be Sanders, and they want an extra 10 percentage points that I don't think is out there, that they feel if they had, she could be a viable compromise candidate.
I mean, that's my read of it too, right? I think that Warren did her best when she was, trying to stake out her own lane, even if it was a little bit close to Bernie, right? She was doing her best in the beginning when she was, when she was staking out her own lane, when she was emphasizing the things that she is an expert in, banking, finance. There are some issues with her, with her analysis, or rather her prescriptions there, but like those things that can be worked with. She's still far and ahead the best the Democrats have to offer. But I think that shows, like you said, a lack of, reflection upon the party's elite. Because from my perspective, at least in the beginning, right, Warren is the best argument that liberalism, that Democratic parties, whatever Democratic Party establishment's ideology is capable of solving the problems that people have in their lives. She was the best. She was the face of that, and actually articulating the policies that she had. They weren't all good, but she was thinking them through. She had people working on them. She was putting them out there for feedback. But over the time, it transitioned to I'm going to say it honestly, a lot of Clinton staffers, a lot of Clinton staffers moved from campaign to campaign like a plague of locusts, just destroying them, and they were determined to turn her campaign into another repeat of Clinton's campaign in 2016, just like they were with Kamala Harris's campaign. And I don't know what that's supposed to prove other than that Clinton cannot win the presidency.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think some of the people were also sort of some former Obama people too. There was a real mix in there, but what happened is they all started with knowing, and I think this was the case, that if there was a path to the presidency or to the nomination for Elizabeth Warren, it was because she was going to be the compromise candidate. And instead of just letting her be Elizabeth Warren and do exactly what you say, rest on her strengths, which were in that finance, consumer protection area, they made her the compromised candidate, where it was they were trying to land in the right place. And it was over-engineered.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, again, the idea of a unity candidate is flawed inherently, but had she stayed in the place she was in the beginning, had she stayed there and still come in maybe second, third, maybe third place, let's say minimum, she came in third place, I think she would have had a much better argument going into convention that, at least among Sanders supporters, I would have voted for her, at least in the beginning. I was a lot of other people were against her, for very legitimate reasons, some for illegitimate reasons, but I was you know what, if it's Elizabeth Warren, I'd be okay with that. I think a lot of people since then who were fine with her have absolutely gone what's happened? They don't even understand what's happened to her campaign. And obviously you can't say it's Clinton staffers, that's entirely their fault because she hired them, right? She's in charge of that. So that's a judgment call. But even that, I would say, speaks to, I think in her campaign, in the rise and fall of her campaign, is a lesson about trying to speak to both the center and the left base at the same time, and even more specifically, trying to appeal to the core of Democrat, the Democrat media political establishment classes values, and just not realizing that those people are just not broadly representative of everybody else. And then you find yourself in a situation where it's okay, yeah, instead of being, compromise candidate, the best of both worlds, someone that people are genuinely happy to vote for, you find yourself being, having still a bunch of op-eds written about you about how you're a great candidate, but that's not being reflected in the polls. Right. She got into that bubble and she allowed it to affect her judgment in a way that I don't know if she can recover from at this point. I think now she's with the super PAC thing. My read of that, because we won't know who is putting money into that super PAC until after Super Tuesday. My read into that is that it's bad. Is that the people who are putting money in that super PAC are bad, and she knows that they're bad, but a Clinton staffer and Obama staffer is getting rich off of it, and so you got to hold your nose and let it. And they're hoping that money, that ad buy, will get her enough attention and and support, and so that when it comes out who's supporting that PAC after, it'll be irrelevant. It'll be irrelevant
because largely it's only relevant to people there's not a lot of I'd be shocked if not out of 100 voters, 99 go in there unless they're specifically interested in getting money out of politics, and even then, will be like a super PAC. What? Like, I don't know what that means. Even I mean, or at the very least, it's not going to influence their thing. But, and I didn't want to spend this much time on Warren, but I do think it's the most fascinating story of the campaign. I would even argue that the takeaway is even broader than that. It is a situation where it's like she was the product, if you will, was fine on day one. It's just the problem is that you start bringing in a bunch of consultants and executives. They're like, well, I've got to put my imprimatur on this product. And otherwise, like, you know, I need to, you can find this, I think, probably in every industry. And I always relate it back to executives, looking at the script writing, where it's just like, I read, so therefore I can comment on this script, and I have to. And it's like, do you really think that the dad should have a mustache? It's just sort of like, well, let's put a mustache on him. And they're trying to really use the candidate to create their own value. And that ends up bad things come from that.
I agree. Go ahead.
Don't you think the presence of these people and their continued prominence in campaigns like Elizabeth Warren shows that this kind of kamikaze mindset is still alive and well in the Democratic establishment? Like, I don't even think that they would frame it in the terms of we're willing to hurt our own party to block Bernie, because they really believe that he can't win. They really believe that he is a risk on the level of someone getting indicted or whatever. And we already know that they're great at assigning blame. If they believe Bernie can't win anyway, there's no harm in cramming one of their candidates down everybody's throats. And then when they lose, once again, they can blame Russia. They can blame racism. They can blame Bernie Sanders. They can blame any number of things.
I mean, I'm talking about the people working on the people working on Warren's campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. But these are like the same people that I'm talking about.
I don't think they're the same people. I think they have a different agenda.
Well, I'll address, I guess, both points too. The first, and like I'll try to combine them in the way I conceptualize it. The first is like I think that you're right, and because of that, and because of her campaign, the loss of her campaign, she started out so high or high-ish, and you saw such a sharp downtick. Like, her campaign, more than any of the others, more than Kamala's, more than any of the other failures, it implicates that class of people. It heavily implicates the political media consultant establishment that hangs on to the Democratic Party, like Ramorids, and sort of feeds off that. And so I think that's part of the desperation amongst the people who are self-dealing and and have friends across all industries.
Yes.
to make sure that they still pretend that she's viable, because more so than any other, she's proof of concept that these people do not know what they're doing. The fact that they
because she is a very substantive candidate, and she actually, Kamala Harris had a problem in that there was no underlying product there essentially.
And so I mean, as an example of that, look, she was endorsed, half endorsement by the New York Times meant nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Even with Times readers.
And what does that imply? What does that imply about the social capital, the ability to influence and control the narrative of these people, the ability to just do their job? Like, what is their worth if they can't, obviously, if they can take a candidate like Elizabeth Warren, who has substance, who is very popular broadly, and just absolutely tank her career, what exactly does that mean? And to Jamie's point, I think there's a difference between the people at the Democratic Party who know that this is a grift, who know that they're just here to make money, who know, they might believe generally in the ideas, the broad framework of liberalism. They're definitely not Republicans, but they're just this is a career for them.
They're in an industry.
They're in an industry. This is plenty of people work in industries they don't believe in just because it's what they're good at. And then there's the people who surround them as another ring, who are not grifters. They're half paying attention. They believe in the values of the party. They are supporting, they're trying to support the party. They want equality. They believe in social justice. They may not understand all the the phenomenon there, but they believe in those things. And there is a schism between those two groups that's becoming more and more visible as the race goes on, and the middle group becomes out in their own class interests against Bernie Sanders, because the class interests of that core does not broadly represent the class interests of that ring that surrounds them.
It's not even I don't even know that it's necessarily a class interest in terms of like an economic class, because there are those people who probably feel like I'm in the Bernie's industry. Like this is a classic Coke and Pepsi type of thing where it's like a lot of people, I think, and I think there's more of these people than not because of the nature of Bernie's campaign, but also not just from an ideological standpoint, but that he's been in independent circles, that he's been sort of like outside of the party apparatus, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of people who are just like, I'm not going to get a job.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to get a job in this administration. I'm not going to get the sinecures that I was getting from the DNC because he will take over that apparatus, or his people will, and they will hand out contracts to other people. Yeah. And they may actually even have rules where it's like, based upon the way that Bernie's campaign has gone, like, we're not giving you 15%. And I saw it in the entertainment industry at one point, like managers got 15%, and then people just decided they're getting 10. Yeah. So you may not, as a media buyer, get that 20% VIG that you were getting. And then all of a sudden, all the consultants go, well, actually, Texas is out of reach. I mean, the reason why Texas is always in play is because it's a huge media center. And so the only way you can run in Texas, man, in a statewide race is to buy TV ads. I'm going to buy them for you. I get 20% VIG.
I agree. I mean, there are definitely a lot of people, not a lot. There are definitely a few people, billionaires obviously is one class, but like just the Democrat consultancy, people like Neera Tanden, let's be honest, who a Bernie Sanders president is an actual real threat to them. It's like, it's a real threat to them. They're not an
ideological threat, like a material threat, and not from the taxes, because I think a lot of these people have no problem with taxes. Certainly Warren's campaign, Warren's programmatic thing has as much, tax burden as Bernie's, but maybe close, at least, from their perspective. But I think what Warren tried to do is to assure that sort of Borg, if you will, like I'm not as much of a threat to like literally your ability to pay your mortgage.
Well, a lot of people are very comfortable with assigning the blame of what's going on in society to billionaires, like to just billionaires specifically. And that's the end of their, big banks, billionaires, that's the end of their analysis. And they don't understand the entire culture or surrounds that and like the tentacles that come out of that. And so Warren represented a Bernie type candidate who people could broadly get behind ideologically, but the people in certain industries like consultancies and the media who would be implicated, if not essentially by Bernie's analysis, had exemptions carved out for them by Elizabeth Warren's analysis. At least they felt that way about it, along with the technocratic aspects of it. My only addition to to your point though as well would be that Warren's candidacy it was sunk by listening to those people. Like it was absolutely like she is proof of concept for why you should not have dealt with those people, and why that particular why that particular industry is just absolutely a Ponzi scheme. Yep. It's essentially it's a lot of self-dealing. It's kids of maybe once really, really good political operatives. Like we don't Harry Reid's like niece or Harry Reid. Like it's like if Harry Reid,
it's a full employment program for the fail sons of actual political people. I
mean, on my show, one of my co-hosts called it, it's like intellectual Habsburg syndrome. It's like it's like you might have started off with like people who really smart, really capable of leading, but all the self-dealing, all the incestuous nature of like the political media consultants class, you end up with just like someone's dumb stepson is now the head of this think tank, and it's like and it's being.
And we should be
revealed.
clear. This, I think, is an affliction that is not unique to politics.
No.
I mean, it is in I feel like it's been in every industry that I've ever been associated with, including the restaurant I worked at.
And I would I remember my point.
I want to hear more about that.
Well, it was a lot of BS. I got fired.
I would remember the point I was going to make was that like also, what you hear all the time, at least when you're online, is, how unprofessional David Sirota is, how unprofessional like the members of Bernie Sanders comms and, Brianna Greyjoy and all the people are, and how like they're terrible and terrible and terrible. And it's just like, it's clear though that they have run one of the most effective campaigns in the past decade of politics since I would argue Obama ran in 2008 and Obama for America. It rivals that, maybe exceeds that. But none of the ire at that campaign, the ire aimed at them is entirely because they're outsiders. It's not about their competency at their job. They do a great job. None of that ire is aimed at the people who sunk Kamala Harris's campaign, Elizabeth Warren's campaign.
Right.
I'm not a fan of Kamala Harris, and I might get flack for this, but I think she deserved better than what they gave her. It's like what the Hillary Clinton campaign staffers did to her. Like, she was her own candidate. I didn't like her. Kind of sucked. Like jailed, was an agent of the police state. But just trying to rerun Hillary Clinton's campaign with her at the forefront of it was disrespectful.
Yeah.
And
I agree with that.
Don't you think that people's ideology often follows their class interests, and regardless of whether they're driven by ideology or interests or patronage or some combination thereof, like the outcomes effectively are the same?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, say again?
Oh, like you were talking about whether people are driven by ideology or just needing a job in this like circle jerk of patronage. Don't you think at the end of the day, the outcomes are the same and it maybe doesn't matter so much?
So, I mean, in my opinion, I agree with you. The outcomes in this case are what matters. I think we spend a lot of time, especially in political media, worrying about whether someone's a bad faith actor or whether they're just stupid. That at a certain point is irrelevant. It's just at a certain point, you should know thy enemy, but the outcome of why, the fact that they are continually engaging in malfeasance or continually smearing people is the most important thing. Trying to argue whether what the intention there is a way to absolve them of any kind of moral or intellectual responsibility for what they're doing. When it comes to the ideological aspect of it, I think what we're seeing here is a centrist class, and this happened in 2016, crystallizing. And by crystallizing, I mean there have always been centrists throughout history, but when I say centrist, I mean that their ideology is mostly a reflection of their position as comfortable under the current status quo. And so their ideological components are just myopic, solipsistic, reaching out oh, this enriches me, and if it enriches me, it's what's best for society. And I think that's what makes the centrist class, which has other attributes, a little bit difficult to deal with, because their version of what represents a positive social order is entirely founded upon what's best for them. And so they look at someone like Bernie Sanders. I think this is where it melts together. They look at someone like Bernie Sanders. They say, well, he's bad for me, and therefore he must be bad for society.
Right. But I think the reason why it does make a difference that the outcomes may be the same is that theoretically anyways, and I don't think you'd want to do this, but I'm quite convinced that if Bernie announced one of the other things that we're going to do is we're going to establish a fund to fund a huge think tank, and we're going to hire all of you. Oh. I think literally the next day they go you know what? Actually, I'm starting to see that this could work.
Maybe a just transition program.
Right. I don't think that their ideology. I don't think they share Bernie's ideology, but I think it's enhanced by the fact I think a lot of these people can get over the ideology if they thought but I'm going to get hired, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, and I think once it becomes sort of uncontroversial, if it does, that he is the nominee, there's going to be a certain percentage of those people who are going to come over and say, I'm willing to get on board if they get the call saying hey, we need you to do these comms
well,
things.
The good
Peter
news
Dow's
for
of the
them
world
is that Bernie wants a federal jobs guarantee, but that may not satisfy them because they might actually have to do some work.
Right. I mean,
I think what you're speaking to is that at the core of this party is a mix of grifters and true believers. But I think that the number of true believers who have a true real ideology divorced from hey, you know what, whatever gets me a job is what's good is very small by this point. I think there are very few people within the Democratic Party higher ups who are operating on I just really like center right neoconservative
I agree. I think you have that, and then your priorities become a lot more me focused at that point. All right, we didn't get to. I wanted to talk about coronavirus. We can talk about it maybe after Weigel when we bring Kate in, who my understanding is a physician. Is that correct? Yes. And so she can discuss this. But I think where I was headed before we got sidetracked by is that in the general election, coronavirus has the opportunity. One of the concerns about Bernie is that he changes the election, not for everybody, but for certain cohorts, from a referendum on Donald Trump to a decision between two different candidates. That is what the concern is, particularly with suburban women, is that it goes from a just purely I'm coming out to vote against Donald Trump to, and I don't know that it is, but this is the concern, and I think there's some validity to it, at least at this point, and we're far out from like the actual choice when I think things become a little bit more rational, but that it's going to change it from a referendum election for certain groups to a decision between two candidates, in which case then it becomes harder for the non-incumbent. I mean, that's just the way that elections work. Coronavirus, I think, is something that has the potential to inoculate, sorry to stay in the medical world, but to inoculate the election from becoming a choice between two different candidates for that cohort and remain steadfastly a referendum on Trump. Because if I'm in the suburbs and I am worried about my children, I mean, everybody is, but I mean, we're talking about people who are, helicopter parents. And I'm worried about my kids going to school because I'm seeing that the complete failure of our government to just do the basics. I'm just going to go in there, I'm going to be reminded that not only is he offensive and, maybe an autocrat, but he's not even one who can get the trains running on time.
I mean, I don't know if you know this about me, Sam, but I'm a social scientist. And so I would consider myself to be an expert in suburban moms because I watch hundreds of hours of Lifetime movies.
Yes.
And that's the target audience. So I have a lot of, text analysis of it. And so I think that you're right. I think that the coronavirus is, if properly mobilized by the left and by Bernie, is a proof of concept of everything he's talking about. It can be used as a proof of concept of literally everything that he has been talking about this entire campaign. On the flip side, the suburban moms, like even Trump could weaponize it. This could be a referendum on immigration. It could be a referendum on just the fact that we have a population of people, whether it becomes maybe Mexicans coming in have coronavirus next. So I think that we have to be careful about this could go either way. I think coronavirus could be weaponized either way because a pandemic is a very, very energy rich.
That's definitely what they're trying to do. But when Trump says we should close the border, I think Chuck Schumer should go oh, you want to close the borders? Okay, no more flying in and out of the United States.
Yep.
And see how quickly.
No more commerce.
Yeah, exactly. Let's not take any more ships. If Mr. President, if you want to propose that. We, because we will respect national unity, although we're against it, we will say okay, and then see how many hours that lasts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's that. All right, we're going to take a break here. We're going to give a call to Dave Weigel just to get a sense of what's going on in South Carolina. I believe he is on the ground in South Carolina, maybe at probably it's south of the border. So I think where he would probably hang out. Do you know that place? Your family's from South Carolina? Yeah. Oh, so you probably spent most of your childhood at south of the border buying fireworks.
Myrtle Beach, buying fireworks and funnel cake.
All right, we'll take a quick break. Back, Sam Cedar on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program from the Washington Post, the political reporter from the Washington Post, the author of the trailer, which is an email blast that you can guess, and of course a double secret agent with the CIA, Dave Weigel. Dave, welcome back to the program.
No, it's good to be here, man. The whole company thanks you.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad I'm on the right side of those things. Now, are those truck engines I'm hearing? Are you at south of the border? Brandon's here. His family's from South Carolina. He did not even know what it was. It is the world's greatest truck stop, right at the border of North Carolina and South Carolina, and you get all sorts of fireworks.
I'm not there. That sounds awesome.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
It's funny because my grandfather was actually a trucker. So
oh, there you go. So where are you?
I am at a Caribbean place that is in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm about to get back on the road to go cover the final Bernie Sanders rally before the primary. I just finished with Joe Biden. So the beeping you're hearing is, I don't know. Ignore any sounds around me. I'm safe, and I'm certainly not doing any work for the CIA.
Okay, well, as long as that's the case, I mean, that to me, that beeping sounds very South Carolinian, and it's providing a nice audio context. That's what everybody says when you go down to South Carolina.
It's saying bless your heart in Morse code.
Bless your heart. Whenever I go to South Carolina, people always say to me, make sure you check out the beeping. So, all right. So what's your sense? I mean, the polls, there's a lot of polls that have come out. I've seen ones. I think Data for Progress had one where Biden was up by 9. Yeah. And then I've seen ones where he's up by, I think, like 20. Give me your sense of, A, where Biden's support is relative to the other candidates, and B, where it's been and what the trajectory has been.
Well, he's always had very strong support, but less strong than Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago. That's kind of the story of the Biden campaign everywhere. That he has been really no lower than the high 20s in South Carolina, and he hit those numbers in some states, but not many, in Iowa, New Hampshire, states that he would end up giving up on. So he is fairly strong here, and I think some people let expectations get out of hand, the idea that Bernie could win the state outright. That if it happened was possible only because Tom Steyer was splitting up some of the non-Biden vote and some of the non-Sanders vote. Without that, with Biden having a pretty good debate performance, with him getting the endorsement of James Clyburn, he could win, but it might be a much less commanding win than Barack Obama, and it's going to be almost certainly a much less commanding win than Hillary Clinton. I mean, Hillary Clinton won by more than 50 points here. That gave her the delegate margins that reshaped the primary. And really, Bernie Sanders was never able to catch her afterwards. I don't think you'll see the same thing here, but I do think in the last few days, the last week rather, there was could Biden lose South Carolina speculation that was probably a little bit too fanciful for Bernie people.
So really, it's just going to be a question of, it seems to me, or I guess I want to phrase this in a question. Do you think it's going to be a question of just how well the Biden surrogates do? And by that, I mean, maybe just even some of the actual hosts on some of the networks, but the people going on to create, because they've been setting up this narrative of like, if Biden does well enough, there could be enough momentum where he'll show up in, a Super Tuesday and it's going to change the dynamic. What is your sense? I mean, wouldn't he have to have win by 30 points for that to actually happen? Or do you think, or what? I mean, is that your sense of what the game plan is if you're Biden's people?
Well, even James Clyburn, who endorsed him, was saying he wants to see a win of closer to 15, 16 points. Even that would be the narrower win than Barack Obama got in 2008. It would be comparable to John Edwards beating John Kerry here, and John Edwards did not win the nomination. So I think what you identified something pretty important. There's some spin going on, especially among commentators who either think Sanders would be a disaster or are looking for a Biden comeback. He could win here, but he could win by the kind of margin that really blows up the delegate count. I mean, let's say he won by 20 points and Tom Steyer didn't get any delegates. He'd probably get, actually, despite the split up vote, a lead comparable to what Hillary Clinton got last time. Maybe 5 or 6 delegates less. Or it could be a narrow race. He could get a net of, I don't know, 6 to 9 delegates. And I don't want to get too weedy about this, but if you're looking at his challenges coming forward, he might have problems building on a win of that scale, because he's, even if you look at his ad buys and his travel, he's effectively conceded a lot of Super Tuesday states already. He's conceded Colorado. I'm not speaking for the campaign, but he's not going to them. Colorado, Minnesota, Utah, Maine. There are places that vote California, and but talking about winning in Texas, has a ton of endorsements there, might not be winning there. So the idea that he could get a huge bounce off this and change the map is, I think, a bit much. And then if you look at the idea,
you there?
He's going to be. I'm still here.
Yeah, sorry, you just cut out. Yeah, go ahead. It's not going to change the map.
So, well, if you're talking about momentum, there are places that have been early voting for weeks. I mean, Texas basically is wrapping up early voting this weekend. Like California has been early voting to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of votes. And we actually saw in 2016 there were a ton of votes for Jeb Bush in Texas, even though he dropped out before the primary. So a lot of votes are being locked in while Biden looked really weak. Now, were there people who were deciding between Sanders and Biden? You kind of roll your eyes, but yeah, some people were. They shared some of the same demographics of white working class voters, and also voters who just want to vote for the candidate that they were told can win. And Sanders actually didn't get a lot of Sanders can win coverage. Frankly, one thing that was on my mind as I was with Biden in Fort Sumter, or in Sumter, South Carolina, I should say, is that his poll numbers against Trump, his personal favorabilities, have been slipping since he started entering the race. But you don't really hear that discussed. You do hear anything negative about Sanders. So I think Sanders' momentum has been suppressed a bit by some of the coverage, by some of his abilities to get a ton of new voters to turn out. And I think Biden's being helped by this idea that he's a huge underdog now.
But at the end of the day, I mean, I'm just trying to think of a scenario where it's like Biden gets a 12-point win in South Carolina, and then all of a sudden the money just pours in for him. Like, it's almost like the idea of like, oh my God, he's got this huge surge of money that's come in. Like, who's going to do that? Like, I can't even think like, you know, I just can't, like, there's no scenario. I mean, I can see that they may have a day or two where like, he's the comeback, kid in quotes. I mean, the comeback maybe guy. But the idea that like $20 million of money are going to roll into his campaign based upon that just seems to me to super far-fetched. And he just, my sense is, and you tell me if this is what you know, because you've been on the ground to a lot of these places, is that really it's just Sanders and Bloomberg are the only ones who have sort of the resources in terms of, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of like people on the ground who have been there long enough to have developed like an infrastructure in these places.
That's true. Warren has an infrastructure in a number of the Super Tuesday states. She's stronger than you might think in Texas. She's fairly strong in Minnesota. She was. There are places where I think she's lost ground as voters have started to get nervous that she might not go the distance. But a lot of people had bigger organizations than Joe Biden. Biden has been depending on actually more of a slingshot than Hillary Clinton did. Hillary Clinton had pretty organizations in Super Tuesday states. Biden has not been running ads there. Now, people know who he is, but he's not as present. And he hasn't built organizations beyond, big teams of endorsers. That is not harmful per se, but Virginia is a good example. I mean, there have been Sanders people canvassing for weeks. There haven't been people canvassing for Biden. He's got the endorsements of Tim Kaine today and a couple other people in Virginia politics.
Whoa.
But it took a while, and that is, I mean, how many people does Tim Kaine get to knock on doors for him? That's a big question.
Right. All right. Well, Dave, is there anything that you feel like we haven't touched on? I mean, obviously we're going to talk on Super Tuesday, so we'll leave the powder dry there. But is there anything that you think is uncovered that we should be talking about today that's going to be relevant over the next couple of days?
Well, I think you nailed it pretty good. Well, you need to have clear eyes about what these primary votes mean. I mean, if all these if all the states before Super Tuesday were combined, they'd be the fourth biggest state on Super Tuesday. So most of the delegate selection is coming up. And even after Super Tuesday, 62% of the delegates are left. So you set that up pretty well. I mean, I would say that the Bloomberg factor is interesting here because the way that a Biden win could affect things is if a voter who has seen Bloomberg's advertising and worries that Biden has been fading, if there's an idea that all they need to hear is, oh, Biden won something, and they will stop flirting with Bloomberg and go back to him. But there's a question of how much Bloomberg already did in those states and whether those votes split the right way. So continue looking out for the 15% threshold. Polling sometimes there'll be a poll that warrants at 14%, and people will say she's getting no delegates. That's a little simplistic. If she's at 14, she's getting delegates in a lot of districts in the state. But that is the worry that anti-Sanders people had, for a year, and that they kind of stupidly fell into by just not deciding on one candidate to face him.
Right.
Is there look at whether candidates are in a position to get any delegates at all, and if they're not, so here's how it works. Let's say there's 100 voters and Sanders gets 50 and two people get 25 each. That means they'll split the delegates 2-1-1 if there are 4 in the district. Let's say Sanders gets 50 delegates, one candidate gets 30 delegates, and then a bunch of other candidates split the rest but don't get 15. But that means they only are calculating the delegates based on those first 80 voters. And that's going to happen in a lot of places. That's what happened in Nevada, where only about 60% of voters picked either Sanders or Buttigieg or Biden in the first round, and that meant that 40% of voters voted somebody who didn't get any delegates. That could repeat in a lot of places.
Oh, wow. Okay. And all right, so lastly, let me just ask you, that story that came out in the New York Times, I think it was yesterday, 93 super delegates they talked to, and they talked about, like, we're willing to kamikaze this. What's your sense of that piece, just, broadly speaking?
Yeah, well, that's a classic Democratic strategy here of not coming up with a plan but panicking anyway. There's many ways that Sanders could lose the nomination. I think there's a sense by the Sanders people of creating momentum so that after Super Tuesday they'll look like nobody could catch him. There actually would be time to catch him. The worry is that, and so the argument that they could use the one Sanders used at the end of 2016, which is, look, let's say Sanders wins some primaries, but then he loses the last bunch of them.
Right.
And he comes into the convention with 35% of the delegates. I think there would be a conversation, not so much about the superdelegates, but let's say that other candidates combined for 60% and they form an alliance. That's a situation where people lose sometimes. And but the superdelegates, I'm glad that Reed Epstein, Lisa Larry talked to them, because I don't think they understand how this stuff looks. And to them, it's just self-evident that Sanders can't win the election. I would give it caution. There's an idea that they'd rather lose than nominate Sanders. I don't think that's true for most of these people. I think they honestly they've been told their whole lives that someone like Sanders can't win. They just think they'd be nominating a guy who can't win the election despite everything we know about him. So that's what they're worried about. And in their minds, voters will say, oh, of course, we need anything we can to avert disaster. And I don't think they appreciate how people would actually look, even at, let's say, Sanders had 35% of the vote and the next two candidates combined the next two candidates had 30 and 25.
Right.
Even then, I think people would look skeptically on them trying to form an alliance.
I agree. All right, Dave, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Sorry that you didn't get a chance to see south of the border this time around, but maybe in
sometime,
2024. All right, thanks.
All right, thanks, man.
Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen, Dave Weigel. Kate, you want to come and join us? So, I mean, that's, it's basically sounds like unless Joe Biden does something supernatural in South Carolina, nothing is going to change.
I mean, I would love to see him do something supernatural. That would be, if he does something supernatural, you know what? He has my vote.
There you go.
Like I'm not a purist. If he like walks on water or something.
I was going to say levitate maybe at the
any candidate that demonstrates supernatural abilities, I think, is going to deserve a second look. The
most supernatural ability Joe Biden could demonstrate is keeping his hands to himself. It's just like or finishing a full sentence.
Yeah, exactly.
Now joining us. Oh, we got to switch that button on the bottom there. I will vamp. Ladies and gentlemen, making her way to the studio and sitting down, Kate Willett.
Hello.
Kate, you are the host of Reply Guys.
Yes.
That's basically like, those are like people who like in a thread, a guy will come in. I'm trying to think. I just saw a great example of, you always see like one of those like where somebody comes in like, you're an idiot, they say to a woman, like a guy said.
Yeah.
you're an idiot, and you don't know anything about animals. And it's like, I'm the head of zoology at
yes,
the
totally.
most prestigious university in the country.
Exactly.
Or something like that.
Yeah. We called it that because it's a feminist podcast where we talk about lefty politics stuff. And I think me and, my co-host Julia and I both felt in 2016 that a lot of the online discourse was dominated by very loud dudes. So we wanted to give a nod to that. But also, I think over the course of this election cycle, we're like, are we the reply guys? You know?
That's right.
The more and more mad we get about like the DNC, like thinking about taking it or whatever, we're like, yeah, we're up in those threads as well.
Yeah,
The reply
it
to
happens.
becomes the replier.
Exactly.
There you go. I almost, I noticed you corrected your grammar.
Yeah.
And I was going to hop in and correct your grammar.
I know.
But only after you did it, because I wouldn't have known. But I thought there was a joke. There was like a form function joke there.
Yeah, and I saw that like on the horizon, and I didn't want to force you to become the reply guy in that
Right.
moment.
I
So I was
appreciate
like,
that. And you are also a professor of English at Columbia University. Is that correct?
Exactly. No, I'm just a comedian. I am a dirtbag feminist comedian.
There you go. Right.
With an interest in electing Bernie Sanders and other leftist candidates.
Boom.
I
Yes.
never reply to anybody online, and you know how I maintain that? Illiteracy. Check it out. Check it out, folks.
Nice.
Yes.
Well done.
Well, they say that literacy is in and of itself a communist plot. Did you guys see that tweet? That was
I
some
did
real
not see that
Galaxy
one.
Brain shit.
Yeah.
That literacy is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was some guy who's, frankly, he said he's a Reaganite, but in like Poland, who said that, the first thing the communists do is teach you to read. This was in regards to Fidel Castro. So if you want to be an anti-communist, maintaining illiteracy is a good
Can't read
first step.
Marx if you're not literate.
That's also probably not the first thing they do. I just want to put that out there.
Second, third.
I mean, depends on how many people are literate.
I guess coincidentally, I went with my ex-wife to produce her documentary in Cuba some 20 years ago. And it was in part on photographers. Well, it was all on photographers in Cuba, but some of whom were Castro's personal photographers to capture the revolution because illiteracy rates were so high that he knew that he had to tell the story of the revolution in photos. And that was the explicit sort of like game plan. And then of course he did, expand literacy among other things. I've been down there. There were definitely like political repression. People were worried about saying things. I actually almost sunk the whole project by revealing to a guy in flip-flops and a tank top that we were doing a movie, and he apparently was like on a committee for the counter-revolution. And then we got our inside person at the cultural attaché, essentially, gave us word, and I had to create a whole fake of dummy tapes. And apparently that's what happened with La Bamba. They went down there. I think it was that movie La Bamba. They got to the airport with all their film and
With Lou Diamond Phillips?
I think it was it La Bamba or it was some other, it was a movie. No, it wasn't La Bamba. It was one about these Cuban, I can't remember what the movie was now. Motorcycle Diaries? No, not Motorcycle Diaries.
The Buena Vista Social
music.
Club?
No. What was it?
Godfather 2.
No, it was not Godfather 2. It was
Scarface.
No, not Scarface. And they took all the footage. They had shot all the footage and they just took it at the airport.
Oh my God.
That was, anyways, let's talk coronavirus. Can we please? Kate, as you know, you are the head of epidemiology
Yes.
at Mount Sinai Hospital. And
The main thing that's important is nobody wash their hands ever.
There you go.
Ever.
We are in a sort of stunning era where we are watching, one of the problems with the autocracy of China is that you can't respond to things like this. at least initially, right? Like their denial of the problem exacerbated the problem. And then when it got to the point where it's got, they have the ability to shut things down. But there is real, I think, legitimate concern amongst at least some of the sort of experts I'm reading that they're beginning to become skeptical of the numbers that are coming out of China, that they think it's probably worse than is being reported. And so, I mean, I guess we won't know for a while, but, you know, it's like watching the Chernobyl. You know, there's a lot of like CYA that goes on here. And now in this country, we're going through the same thing. Here's Donald Trump, the woman behind Donald Trump, as he's talking about it. She is, what is her position exactly? She's like the chief, oh gosh, what number clip is this? Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, this is this is Dr. Ann Schuchat, and she is one of the key players in sort of the response to the coronavirus. And we should make it clear that, you know, she's the deputy director of the CDC. And watch her face as Donald Trump refers to how, like, this is not a big deal. It's like a common cold.
Any of their behaviors?
No, I think you have to always, you know, I do it a lot anyway, as you probably heard. Wash your hands, stay clean. You don't have to necessarily grab every handrail unless you have to. You know, you do certain things that you do when you have the flu. I mean, view this the same as the flu. When somebody sneezes, I mean, I try and bail out as much as possible with the sneezing. I had a man come up to me a week ago. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Fine, fine." He hugs me, kisses. I said, "Are you well?" He says, "No." He said, "I have the worst fever and the worst flu." And he's hugging and kissing me. So I said, "Excuse me." I went there, I started washing my hands. So you have to do that. You know,
watch your face.
I really think, Doctor, you want to treat this like you treat the flu, right?
I mean, a bit, but
you know, it's going to be.
No, yeah. Now you can't see this. I love that. This footage is a little bit broken up, but the look on her face is like, no. But yeah. She can't get up and say that. And they have a concerted effort. Mike Pence's czarism on this is not, I'm going to coordinate all of the different efforts. It's, I'm in charge of making sure no one says anything that will reveal what's really going on. That seems like a problem, Kate, as a chief epidemiologist at various New York hospitals.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, you know, I would say that my official medical opinion is that it's not good, especially in a country where we don't necessarily have healthcare available to every person. It seems like it could go wrong, but, you know, what do I know?
Well, I mean, so much of this is about, I mean, we now have a whistleblower who's going out. Like, yeah. I mean, remember the chain of events here. The CDC, there were people coming from on a flight, coming off of a cruise liner that people were afraid had been infected.
Yeah.
The CDC did not want to fly them back commercially.
This was a Scientology cruise. Is that a detail that was correct?
Is that right?
I think it was.
A Scientology cruise?
I think it was a Scientology.
Is that
oh my
right?
God.
I can try to look that up. But
I'm not
They
sure.
do believe in physical ailments, right?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, sometimes with these cruise ships, people will have like conventions on like the cruise ship itself, but it not be like a Scientology cruise. Like they'll just have like a convention on like a particular cruise ship. Like they'll have like 150 people on.
Oh, yeah.
Who knows?
Like
Either way, it's
I went on a Rock and Roll cruise like that. It was like 100 punks and a bunch of normies on a Carnival cruise ship.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely irrelevant. The bottom line, though, is that you have these Americans. They're being repatriated. The CDC said, we shouldn't do this. Like, we shouldn't do this. And the Trump administration overruled them because they didn't want anybody to think like it was a big deal. You know, it's like the Trump story. The guy had a fever. He came in and hugged me. And I'm like, come on, guy. And then because they don't want to alarm anybody, Health and Human Services sent federal workers to go and like deal with these people coming off and did not equip them in any way properly, brought them to an air base, I guess. And this guy in California who has it, they're only suspecting because of the federal regulations that basically narrowed who should be tested for this. federal regulations that were just propagated by the CDC being stepped on by the Trump administration. They can't quite figure out where it is, but they think it may have something to do with these workers. And a whistleblower has now come out and said that they had no monitoring, no testing regime in place. And it is the first U.S. contracted, not coming from overseas, but contracted within the U.S., comes from that general vicinity. And people are starting to speculate that it's a function of that. And then apparently, when someone at the Health and Human Services talks about it, they're criticized for hurting morale and then ordered to another position or to be fired by the administration. That seems to be, you're playing with fire.
Definitely seems that way. It seems like also that this could end up, like you were saying earlier, like I definitely think that they could possibly start alienating even people who have gone with them on some of the other corruption stuff, like people who absolutely don't care about anything related to Ukraine or, Russia. I think could potentially be like, okay, well, I don't want my kid to get this virus. It might start leaking into people who voted for him actually.
I think that's true too, and the stock market has, look, I think the stock market is completely overrated in terms of an economic measure, and it is helping a fairly narrow subset of Americans, but they are highly sensitive to it, and as it drops, I think it starts to shake some of his support, even from the wealthy folks. I
mean, the stock market as a measurement of the faith that a particular part of the population has in the functioning of the country and of the world, it's good for that. Unless you don't try to extrapolate. Right. But look, I'm not an epidemiologist like Kate, although I do have a master's in body language analysis.
A body language expert. Nice.
Ladies. But here's what I will say about the coronavirus, just apart from the points already made. I think as epidemic, it has the ability to lay bare just how many gaps we have in our society at various levels and various points. And not just the ineptitude of the Trump administration, but like Katie said, it's we live in a country where millions of people don't have health insurance. And not only do millions of people don't have health insurance or access to health care, even more people are health care precarious in a way that might lead them to, roll the dice if they have the symptoms. We have a culture of people who are just afraid to go to the doctor, who have an instinctual fear of going to the doctor because, hey, what if I go to emergency room, my insurance company will only cover if I'm admitted, and so I go, and what happens, if I'm not sick, I'd rather just wait until it gets too bad, right? And so that's one aspect of it. And the second aspect, we have a culture of people, no paid time off. A lot of people don't have sick days. A lot of people can't take, for a lot of people, they take off to go to the doctor, they get coronavirus, that's their paycheck, that's their rent money. And so you're weighing health versus going to the doctor. And just another point that people have been making. Right.
I got news for you. Enjoy your salad at your next restaurant meal.
Yeah.
Worked by someone who doesn't have time off.
Exactly. The CDC did a study a few years ago. It came out that they polled restaurant workers. And I'm sure you remember this, Sam, because I might have heard it on your show. And they found out that 15% of restaurant workers come into work despite the fact that they are sick with some kind of stomach contagion.
Yep.
that leads to vomiting or diarrhea. So they come to work and they handle food and they do. And so that's how salmonella spreads, and it'd be how the coronavirus spread. So there are so many little aspects of our society that are obviously always deleterious and hurt people on an individual level, and they are able to be abstracted, or rather made into a discrete problem for individuals, because we have a hard time conceptualizing something as social health. And so when you put an epidemic into the mix, people have a much easier time oh yeah, all of these things that people struggle with all the time do not exist in vacuums. They're actually related to our society in sort of in a given flow way. And I would even say something that people are advising, or rather making the connection with, Medicare for all would have done a lot to abate this health crisis.
Yes.
But And so like obviously coronavirus is a public health crisis, but I would say it's a step further. It's like the lack of Medicare for all, the fact that we have so many people without access to healthcare, without access to medication, by itself was a public health crisis. And now that we have the influx of a pandemic or epidemic, I don't know the difference right now off the top of my head, but I used to. It's like that public health crisis is becoming visible to what it actually is, which is
right.
Yeah, and the virus doesn't discriminate between who's poor and who's rich.
It's the great equalizer.
I mean, Bernie's always saying we're all in this together. Maybe that will help hammer the point home for some people. I saw a news story today about a guy who thought he had the coronavirus. He'd been to China. He got tested for it. And then he gets a bill for thousands of dollars. Then I saw Nancy Pelosi saying, oh, the vaccine should be affordable. People should have affordable access to it. Like, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Just give it to people.
Yeah. I mean, I am a comedian, and so most of my friends who are also comedians do not have any health insurance. And, if we need to go to the doctor, we just end up like paying cash. And, most of my friends...
You pay in jokes?
Yeah. But I mean, like, honestly, most of the time, like, we end up trying to just cure stuff with like, spells and herbs and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of people are living like that, and that is fine with the ruling class in this country most of the time. But it is going to be this thing where, like, at restaurants, the people who are serving your food may not have access to healthcare, and you may just like actually start to see people who normally don't care at all about the fact that a lot of working class people in this country don't have health care. Like, it's going to start to affect their lives in a real way, potentially.
Yeah,
Will
so
doctors
illustrative.
take a coupon for a free drink at Eastville or something like that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Just like, can I pay you in all these drink tickets I've compiled?
This is again, the stock market has a lot of resonance with a small number of people, but these are the people on the vanguard of the sort of the Trump support of people who I think are these are single issue voters on some level, and it's like, what's my stocks doing? And this is Donald Trump has throughout his presidency talked about the stock market probably more consistently than anything else.
Yeah.
And they're on the this is Fox News? CNBC. And you can hear in the background, like, apparently someone is just yelling about what's going on there. I don't know if they actually do this on the floor of the stock market, but watch this.
You'll look for stocks with good dividends and things like that.
Any stimulative effect, if any, that could come out of these low interest rates. Stephanie was saying she was shopping for housing stocks, for instance. How do you look at that?
So, but basically what's happening, I think, is that the reporter from the floor is speaking up to the studio, and they're picking up someone, like some broker just going into a hallway, just going like, I can't fucking believe it, on my shirt. And they're picked it up on that. I think is I think that's a problem for Donald
Yeah,
Trump.
I mean, that's his main argument for his own reelection, is that the stock market was doing well and the economy is doing well, and if that changes, like, people are just like, oh, this guy's pretty corrupt,
I mean, I think both are making great points, and I think the danger there too is him trying to craft a narrative that empowers his far right campaign in a way that spins like, he might lose some stockbrokers because the market's going to crash, but him trying to find a way to turn this into like an argument against immigration, an argument against I've mentioned it prior to Dave Weigel coming on, but we already have camps in place. They already floated the idea of putting homeless people there, and we've already seen that in the case of extreme public distress, people are willing to hand over some civil rights or look past certain things. So I think there is a slight danger that this is used.
They're definitely going to try.
Yeah.
They're definitely going to try. But the problem I think they're going to have with that is when it's clearly not a function of, like, the coronavirus is not coming. It's Italy that's shut down. We do not share a border with Italy. The vast, overwhelming number of immigrants that come, or visitors that come to this country from Italy, do not go via Mexico. That just doesn't happen. And I think that that's something they can sell to their, like, the core.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. But from the perspective of, like, you know, again, suburban voters who are, to the extent that there are any swing voters in this, or to the extent that there are any voters who are going to come out and make it a referendum on Trump, and maybe the existence of like a Bernie on the ticket might be, you know, make it more of a decision. I think that's not going to work with them in the same way. Plus, the reality is, and I don't know from a political perspective if this has any salience, the reality is that, like, our immigration policy in this country, scaring immigrants to the extent that we have, undocumented, is the worst case scenario you have when you're dealing with a pandemic.
Exactly.
Because these people, the last thing they're going to do, I mean, you talk about like lack of health insurance being a reason why you don't go in. The idea that I could endanger my entire family and I could get kicked out of the country because I'm sick, I'm not going in. Like, literally, you know, if this thing is as contagious as it sounds, we may have to see like underground clinics that are set up to service folks who are afraid of going into the hospital and getting, because it would not be absurd for them to think like, I'm going to be on some type of registry and I don't want to do that. I mean, I can't be quarantined.
I mean, they're right. I mean, honestly, and I think that goes back to my point. It's an important point that you're making. It's like the infrastructure that would lead this pandemic to be uncontrollable is already there, or the lack of infrastructure. Like ICE already does things like that. So like anyone who pretends as though somebody not going to the hospital because they believe they have corona symptoms who is undocumented is behaving irrationally is wrong. It's like, because there's 100% chance that ICE will come, not 100%. There's a very good chance that ICE will come in and like to the hospital and you will be removed and deported back to Mexico. And they're right now they're also trying to denaturalize people at the same time. And so like escalating this is only going to cause more people to go underground and more people who might have symptoms to continue to like try to avoid being on various like lists or documented at hospitals. And so we already have all of the missing pieces in place in our society to make something like this go rampant. And now we have to actually sit down and question like how we got so far down the line where it's very possible that a pandemic could just ravage America, and because we just don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with it.
Right. And we should be clear, like, you know, I don't want people to panic too much. The death rate for this at this point, to the extent that we understand, is close to about 3.5%. Now, again, the numbers out of China are, you know, certainly people are starting to question whether we actually know the real numbers. But it is extremely contagious. And really what is more likely that we're going to see is not just like people in the suburbs worried about their kids in going to school, but it's also going to be like, Facebook just canceled their coders meeting in Santa Cruz, and Microsoft's not sending people to the gaming convention. And it's like, it's not irrational to entertain the notion that like, we may not have political conventions this year. I mean, it's, you know, like it's not, you know, I don't think we're there. And I think it's a big leap to say that that's going to be the case. But it is not irrational to entertain that notion that you know, like big parts of Italy apparently are shutting down.
That's.
I mean, this is, my daughter texted me today because my daughter's whole, she's got a cottage industry of taking the clothes that I buy her and then selling them online to Depop, and I don't know what that is. And then she sometimes uses the money she gets to buy stuff, and she texted me today, and she goes, I got a notice from Depop. Clothes I ordered on February 1st are not going to come. They don't know when it's coming because of coronavirus in China. I'm terrified. What am I going to do? And I'm like, well, they're not going to send you coronavirus in the mail. It's just like, but, you know, we're going to start to see more and more of this. There's already apparently one now official shortage of a drug that has been announced by the CDC as of today. I don't know what the drug is because it's all being made in China. All right, well, before I want to take a break here and we'll go into the fun half. And when we come back, I want to talk about what the brain trust of the Republican Party, Rush Limbaugh, has instructed all of them to do. And they seem to be trying to do it, but it's hard. It's a hard thing for them to do. We'll be back in a moment with the fun half. In the meantime, just a reminder, this show relies on your support. You can go to jointhemajority.report.com. Check out the AM Quickie, also justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Brandon, you want to talk about the discourse? Where can people see that?
You can
hear that.
Huh? Well, you can't see it anywhere because it's all audio, which is why I do less visual jokes now. You can find Discourse on all of the major podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, and you can also become a patron of the Discourse if you like how well I fill out this split screen. If you like the girth, you can become a patron at patreon.com/expanded discourse, where we have a special tier now.
Expanded discourse.
Expanded discourse. Expand, like EXP.
That.
I know it's great. We have a special tier now. 10%. I'll analyze your body language. I'm sorry, $10, and I'll analyze your body language via the internet.
Well, that's pretty good. That's even more impressive that you can't see it and you can actually assess it.
When you get to the level that I've gone to in body language analysis, you don't require.
You're intuitive.
It's intuitive.
Right.
It's like you can sense it. You can see the chakra points.
Kate, now I know that you aren't as proficient at the body language thing.
Yeah.
But you are an epidemiologist.
Exactly. So you can find me at various hospitals in New York, diagnosing people with coronavirus and not washing my hands afterwards. You can find me, at a bunch of different places. I have a calendar online. I'm coming to Bloomington, Indiana soon, to the Comedy Attic, and I'm coming to the Comedy Underground in Seattle in a couple weeks.
So how do you end up in Bloomington, Indiana, and then is there something, you have a relationship with Bloomington, Indiana, or is you that's the way you like to barnstorm? I like to just go out to Indiana and then go all the way to Seattle.
Well, I'm doing comedy there. I'm not just visiting to spread coronavirus. I think the first time I ended up in Bloomington, Indiana was for a comedy festival called Limestone Comedy Festival. And then I ended up,
and you made some fans there.
Yeah, I ended up coming back to that comedy club. And same thing with Seattle. I don't know. You just kind of put things together as a comedian. I have a podcast called Reply Guys that I talked about. And it's a fun podcast. It's wherever podcasts are free, on SoundCloud and stuff, and Apple Podcasts. And I was also just on Colbert. So check me out on...
What's that?
The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. I have a special on Netflix. I don't know. I didn't mean for this to go on for 5 minutes.
No,
I tell jokes.
What's the name of your special on Netflix?
It's part of a show called The Comedy Lineup, and it's not... The jokes I told them there are not political. It's just about how I, like to hang out with skater boys and stuff like that from another time, and I hope to go back to it again when Bernie Sanders is the president.
I see, yes.
And I could just focus on not hooking up with the majority.
I got some bad news for you.
Yeah.
That's what I said in the spring of 2004, waiting for the Bush campaign.
No, I understand, and I will continue to remain politically active when Bernie Sanders is the president, but, I'll at least put some energy into not dating skater boys anymore. Right now, I'm not even trying.
Right.
So look out, Beto.
Yeah.
You're officially on.
That's how you could be fighting.
You and your giant teeth are officially on notice.
Jamie, what's happening on the Antifada?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. This week on the Antifada, I spoke with Heather Fortune, formerly of the amazing post-punk band Wax Idols, about our canvassing trip to New Hampshire, the Bernie rally / Strokes concert where one of our friends started a riot, how capitalism is ruining music, especially with regard to streaming services, and Heather spills the tea on why she quit the band White Lung, which probably none of you have heard of, but was once a really good band.
Matt?
Folks' Literary Hangover most recent episode is on Ebenezer Cook's 1731 poem on Bacon's Rebellion. We talk about Bacon's Rebellion, George Washington's great grandfather's role in war crimes in Bacon's Rebellion, and some other things about it, so check it out.
And you can find TMBS at patreon.com, TMBS, or on YouTube, The Michael Brooks Show. Ben Dixon this week, right? I think it was.
Yeah, and Richard Wolff.
All right, folks, quick break, fun half. See you there. left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1 half. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
yeah, we didn't make it. Was that is that Bullfrogs?
It's Bullfrogs.
Yeah. Yeah, they did a great job with that.
It's a delight.
Yeah, it's so funny.
So okay, yeah, let's do this. This is
It came from
this is I'm trying to figure out, like, I want to do this in 4 acts. This is a 4-act play. Or I guess, yeah, it's a 4-act play that we have. It's not really even proper acts. I mean, as a I think both you guys would
Dramaturgy
recognize,
experts.
Yeah, the dramaturgy experts would take issue with
Yeah.
my saying that these are actually 4 acts, because it's really more there is no we're not making the proper dramatic turns at each act. However, this is basically watching a and this is ironic too, because I've used this example as to how we're going to end up suffering from the coronavirus from a societal perspective in terms of goods. Is, you know, the snake has swallowed the rat a couple of months ago, and the rat has not made it all the way through the snake. And that is the disruption in our supply chain that we're going to start, you know, once we start. It's not great.
Oh, I just thought I was confused for a second, because I was like, I thought you were talking about the Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg emoji.
I also thought that.
So narrow.
I was like,
so narrow.
Yeah.
Where's it going?
So narrow.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I was actually talking about a real snake and a real rat. You know, snakes eat rats, and you can watch it actually sort of like go through the snake system. And I was using that as an example of, like,
Yeah, the snake of our supply chain eating
Yes.
the rat of our
yeah, exactly, of the dislocation of the supply chain.
I understand. I just can't think about anything other than emojis right now.
I'm a very literal person, or I guess figurative. I don't know, whatever the opposite, whatever makes what I said make sense. Anyway, no. I mean, I think you're right. It's funny 'cause we mentioned a lot of the ways in which our society is just not built to handle the coronavirus, but like it's funny how interconnected we are now. You know, you mentioned before, like the masks that people need to like actually block out the coronavirus are made in China, and so we can't get it. We can't get them. So
we're also there's going to be about 150 drugs. I think that we're about to have significant shortages of, including some antibiotics. And Matt Stoller is really the guy. If people want to follow this, I mean, I think some people would argue that he's a little bit. There's a little bit of hyperbole there, but I'm not quite convinced that it is hyperbole. But be that as it may, the other place you could use the actual snake and the actual rat, not the emojis, is to watch something come out of Rush Limbaugh's mouth and watch it travel through the conservative sphere. Now, Rush Limbaugh, and bless his heart, he has late-stage lung cancer. We don't know if this is going to, keep him from. But it slimmed him down, and so who knows what's going to happen with Rush? But he is still the intellectual pillar of the conservative movement, and Limbaugh always does this. If it's a massive storm that's coming up, he will always downplay it to his audience because, there's a lot of data that suggests that when there are natural phenomena like a hurricane or a storm or a pandemic, that the inability to respond by the government hurts incumbents. They saw this in Superstorm Sandy, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of data about this. Rush Limbaugh understands this, I think, and has always understood. So he has always made the bet, I'm going to always downplay everything that happens. That way, I mean, unless it's like, the Obama administration, in which case, Ebola was, I think they did, 24/7 about Ebola. But if there's a Republican administration, I'm going to downplay things because my bet I'm making is that more often than not, things don't turn out to be as bad as we think they are. Although once in a while it does, Katrina, let's say, or something like that, and you just take the hit. And so this is what Rush Limbaugh has decided, and this playlet will show you that not only start with Rush Limbaugh, but it travels through the Republican conservative mindset. Here is Rush Limbaugh, 2 days ago, right?
Folks, this coronavirus thing, I want to try to put this in perspective for you. It looks like the coronavirus being weaponized as yet another element to bring down Donald Trump. Now, I want to tell you the truth about the coronavirus. What, you think I'm wrong about this? You think I'm missing it by saying that's... Yeah, I'm dead right on this. The coronavirus is the common cold, folks. The drive-by media hype of this thing as a pandemic, as the Andromeda strain, as, oh my God, if you get it, you're dead. Do you know what I think the survival rate is 98%. 98% of people get the coronavirus survive. It's a respiratory system virus. It probably is a Chi-Com laboratory experiment that is in the process of being weaponized. All superpower nations weaponize bio weapons. They experiment with them. The Russians, for example, have weaponized.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we can.
Weaponize weapons.
They weaponize weapons, but he's lying to you, at least in the sense that right now the data suggests that it's actually 96.5% survival rate. So in other words, it kills 3.5% of people. That's not an insignificant amount of people.
And also it makes you wonder about how we would handle something more deadly.
Well, I mean, someone else can do the math here, but this is extremely contagious. So the number of people who can contract this, say, as opposed to the flu or even the common cold, could be in the millions or tens of millions. I mean, this obviously is a worst case scenario. And then you can do the number, 3.5% of people, not such a small number. And that's presuming that the Chi-Coms, who, Limbaugh presumes created this, are telling us the truth about the figures there.
Which is what you do about your biological weapons.
Right, of course.
Well, I mean, also, like, if you had coronavirus and, you went to the doctor and they're like, oh, there's only a 3.5% chance that you're going to die, you'd still be, like, really upset that was on the table.
Not to mention, you're talking about, because it's so such a contagion, like, so many people will be out of commission potentially for for a week or two.
And you have to stay in your house, right?
Yeah. And so this is going to have impact, not just like, it may not just kill you, it also may just like keep there from being drugs on the shelves. It may keep you from being able to go to restaurants. Who knows? But he's going to downplay it and say that it's nothing. That's what Rush Limbaugh did. So Rush Limbaugh has announced that this is nothing but the common cold. It's been weaponized by the Chi-Coms. You have nothing to worry about. They're just talking about it. The media and the deep state CDC, the linchpin of the deep state is the CDC.
Also, if there was even, let's say he's right, and there was even a 2% chance that the common cold could kill you, and people were just dropping dead from the cold all the time, I think we would all be really upset by that.
I have a feeling some people would complain. I think we would be very, very serious about the way we took like getting a common cold. It would be sort of a problem. Well, lest you think that Rush Limbaugh no longer has, now he is the he's the freedom the Medal of Freedom winner, and of course, now that he is not only the Medal of Freedom winner, he's always been the intellectual pillar of the right. Therefore, everyone in that ecosphere needs to hear it. Here is the first entry in the person who is taking their talking points from Rush Limbaugh. It is, of course, Donald Trump Jr. on Fox and Friends.
Wow. Are you surprised the way they've been handling the coronavirus situation, meaning Democrats?
Not at all. I mean, we've seen, like you said, we've seen this play out for 4 years. Anything that they can use to try to hurt Trump, they will. Anything he does in a positive sense, like you heard from the reporter that was just suspended from ABC, they will not give him credit for. The playbook is old at this point. But for them to try to take a pandemic and seemingly hope that it comes here and kills millions of people so that they could end Donald Trump's streak of winning is a new level of sickness. I don't know if this is coronavirus or Trump derangement syndrome, but these people are infected badly. To run that in the New York Times, this isn't Vox. This isn't one of these, crazy left-wing journalists. This is the New York Times writing this. It's seriousness. It's truly sick. Now,
there it is. The Democrats are weaponizing this weapon.
Yeah, they're going to start talking about gaslighting soon. It's coming. It started on the left, but it's moving to these people anytime.
Well, if anything, it shows the Trump camp knows that they are uniquely vulnerable in the area of coronavirus.
Yeah.
I will say, I guess 2 points. Rush Limbaugh looks nice with the beard. I like the beard. I don't want to, politics aside, I think the beard's a good look for him. Not so much for Donald Trump Jr. He has a little bit of a Mac from Always Sunny vibe going on.
Yeah.
But like played straight. But I will say, I mean, I love this because I love conspiracy theories. Not coronavirus.
Right.
I'm not in love with respiratory infections. As someone with asthma, I'm incredibly vulnerable to them. But I will say, it's like they're trafficking in conspiracy theories. It's like this is classic conspiratorial thinking. The Chinese, a foreign government, especially the Chinese or the Russians, have created a bioweapon in order to delegitimize the Russian president, and the United States president, and also kill a bunch of Americans. Like that's classic conspiratorial thinking.
It's also sort of a long way to go when you got to shut down like 3 of your cities to play this, to make it seem like it was really real.
The entire cities were crisis actors.
Exactly.
Yeah, crisis cities, if you will.
All of China's a crisis, crisis actors.
Yeah.
It's revolutionary discipline.
I went on Google Maps and guess what I can't find? Wuhan. That place where it supposedly started?
False flag.
Probably
Wuhan.
actually
Yeah.
Wuhan.
Oh, well, that's probably why I couldn't find
False
it. Yeah, all right.
flag.
Okay, well, that's another false
But it relies on they know their audience. Like Rush Limbaugh knows his audience.
Yeah.
Like Rush Limbaugh, I think maybe more so than anybody else. He's been in the game for a long time. He's not stupid. He's just bad. He's just bad. He knows his audience. He knows what's going to play to his audience. In this narrative,
he's constructed his audience.
He's cultivated and he's led them down a far right rabbit hole that makes them very susceptible to this kind of logic. The logic of like, you know what, even if it's not bad, but if it is bad, it's not that bad. But if it is bad, it's the force of foreign government. It's like, so he can have it both ways.
And it's not just the foreign government; it's also the Democrats who have been like the midwives of this in this country. And so, lest you think that so Rush Limbaugh says it, and then Donald Trump Jr. says it, but I mean, at least this isn't going to like anybody who has any real position of authority in our government. Let's say like the guy who's in charge of basically the president, like the chief of staff.
Yeah.
Here's Mick Mulvaney
no.
at CPAC, of course. And, there used to be a time where like when CPAC would roll around in the AM talk radio business, it was like, this is great. We're not going to have to do any work for 2 days because we're just going to have clips of the insanity at CPAC. And now it's like, you can barely tell it's happening because it's almost identical to everything that happens in our government. And here is that blend right there. Mick Mulvaney at CPAC explaining to everyone what essentially Rush Limbaugh has told him to say.
The reason you're saying so much attention to it today is that they think this is going to be what brings down the president. That's what this is all about. I got a note today from a reporter saying, what are you going to do today to calm the markets? And I'm like, really, what I might do today to calm the markets is tell people to turn their televisions off for 24 hours.
He's talking about the coronavirus. Yeah. So apparently, if you turn off your television for 24 hours.
That's how it's transmitted.
It's
cable.
It's like Videodrome.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
The hundreds of thousands of people, or I should say the nearly 100,000 people who have contracted it now, and the almost 3,500 who have died from it, and the millions who are literally being sequestered, and all the production entities in the various countries that are now having these spontaneous outbreaks will all go away. It may be 24 hours, turn off your television. It may be like 24 months, turn off your television, and then you won't know.
Well, I like how they have changed the question from how are the people in charge responding to this to how are Democrats responding to it? Like, what is, basically like what is the media framing versus like, no, what are we actually doing about this potential pandemic?
Right. The DNC has done nothing about coronavirus.
Yes.
I mean, even that's a facet of our society, our culture that is going to, exacerbate the problem. Where it's like it's going to be turned into like an optics issue. It's going to be turned into like a gamesmanship issue, which in many ways is going to get in the way of actually tackling the root cause, which is the fact that we have a virus. That has actually been at this point why we have, to the extent that we have now an outbreak in this country, could be largely attributed to the notion that the Trump administration did not want bad optics. And I think like as much as they want to frame this, the media does, I think it's quite possible that actual events on the ground are going to overtake any type of media narrative they're trying to drive. Here is a perfect example of that. This is, Rush Limbaugh has tried to make the case that this is nothing. And we see Donald Trump Jr. follow. We see Mick Mulvaney follow to the point where it's like all you need is a turn off your TV and you won't see anything. And here is Fox News. This is not Fox and Friends. This is Ed Henry and who else? I don't know. Two Fox people, Ed and Shannon show. And they are interviewing to show everybody like this is no big deal, folks. They're interviewing a Pennsylvania family that has returned home after quarantine. I'm not clear. Did they have the disease? They did. Okay. And they were quarantined for a while.
Daughter at first, like 2 weeks ago or so. And now it looks like it might have spread to the whole family.
Okay. But now they're absolutely fine. You're going to be so assured that everything is fine when you watch this video. Here it is. We brought them on to show like, hey, folks, nothing to worry about here.
I think as time goes forward, hopefully doctors and scientists will get a better handle on the whole situation. fortunately, from what I understand, it is contagious, but the death rate is pretty low. So, yeah, I understand the fear.
Yeah, well, we can see you still have a cough. What do the doctors say about your own condition moving forward as we wrap this up?
No.
Let me get some of that. They said, yeah, I'm fine. I got tested twice, negative both times.
The face she
cough,
makes, like, ugh.
probably just nerves.
Yeah, being on TV.
Oh my God.
Are they in the studio?
No. Are you kidding? No, they're not going to let them in the studio.
I was just checking. I did not think so.
They're in a very remote, I think, studio. Look,
they're so cute, and I really hope they're okay.
I don't want this to come out the wrong. It's gonna sound like wrong, but I trust people to not interpret it wrong. It's like, my man looks terrible. It's just like, he looks like terrible.
Sweaty. I mean, he could be just nervous.
And a hoodie.
Almost seems like they're being punked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, there's three scenarios here. One is, and we got to say this, that is a comedian, and if he is, or like one of those, like the yes men type of guys, or the good liars, I think they were called. And if he is, that dude, honestly, like, should be just give him a Netflix special, just a one-off, just so that he can, like, you could replay that over and over again. I think it was exceptionally well done. The other scenario is, okay, she had it. He said he tested negative for it, so he's fine, and they're going to be fine, and they escaped the whole thing, and it is, in fact, he's just coughing because he's nervous. And then the third scenario is she had it, and now he's catching something, and they're sharing a water bottle, and they're not, like, he's got flop sweat, and like this whole attempt to make everybody feel like nothing to worry about here may have backfired.
Recast that.
If he's a comedian, then his daughter must also be one and in on the bit, because she has amazing timing otherwise. Because the face she made when he drank her water, and then she was like, it's like, that's not good. Like, that's not good.
She was good. I mean,
the cough seemed
let me have a little bit. Can we play that again?
She's so small, and I just want to say one more time that I hope these people are okay.
Oh yes,
yeah.
no, definitely.
I don't want to laugh at something bad happening.
No. I mean,
cute.
like, supposedly they're out of the woods now.
Oh, good.
But this point, when he grabs the bottle and he says, "Let me have some," that to me makes
the
me feel like
death rate is pretty low.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, I understand the fear.
Yeah, well, we can see you still have a cough. What do the doctors say about your own condition moving forward as we wrap this up?
Excuse me. Let me get some of that. They said, yeah, I'm fine.
I can only imagine with the look on the Fox News host face when he's doing this. Like, what, like,
I'm convinced that they walked off the set after this segment and they just went over to the producer and they got to go, "What the are you doing?
Yeah.
Are you telling me we're putting that guy on to make everybody feel like there's no problem
They
here?"
have like snot running down their noses. Yeah, it's like it's a full booger situation.
Total.
He looks very haggard. Like, I mean, he probably, honestly, if we're being like fair, he was probably in quarantine. He's been under a lot of stress.
Absolutely.
He probably got sick for something else because he's just under so much stress. But still, the optics are terrible.
Yeah, let's be clear. This was done. They didn't bring these people. They don't bring the kid on to, like, this is not a hard news segment where it's like, we're going to get to the bottom of what it's like to be. This is, oh yeah, bring the child on there because we want to show. We've been told by Rush Limbaugh that this is really just a ploy for the Democrats to make everybody panic. We need to show everybody that, because this is a pure piece of propaganda, that everything is fine. And I think, like, the thing that's so amazing about it is that hopefully these people are fine, but as a piece of propaganda that you watch total fail.
If they're not fine, like it wouldn't be funny. But if they turn out they're not, if they
horrible,
if they get put back in quarantine like the next week, that would just be like, whoa.
Everybody in that studio, incidentally, also.
That would like shut down Fox News. But I mean, you're right. So like the narrative that Rush Limbaugh is trying to craft, because I listen to a lot of conspiracy theories about a lot of different, even about outbreaks and like, everything. It's like he's trying to have it both ways. Like he wants to say it's not a big deal, but if it turns out that he's wrong in the future, he can blame it on the Chinese. It's like, we were wrong. It turns out that the Chinese created that's more of a that's kind of Rush Limbaugh impression. Anyway, we were wrong. It turns out that the Chinese, had built some sort of weird, a time delay into it, and that's why I was underestimating how insidious they were. But like that, because the first kind of narrative, it's not a big deal. Like you mentioned earlier, the suburban house mom population, it doesn't work on them. It's like everything becomes a big deal when you have a certain level of anxiety surrounding disease. Like the idea of outbreaks and diseases spreading is so deeply ingrained in the industrialization, urbanization of society. Like the fact that when we all came together was one of the first things. Like, hey, diseases might spread, and people leave. The people who go to the suburbs, like they do so to escape. Escape from stuff like that. They do so to avoid having to be on trains with people who are coughing and sneezing, and so their kids can be in these monochromatic little suburbs, and it's not a good look.
Although I think that there are, I'm not sure that this is true exactly, but I feel like I've heard about some disease outbreaks in the suburbs more because a lot of people aren't vaccinating their kids.
Anti-vaccination.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, but that but you can even loop that into this exact conversation because people don't vaccinate their kids because they don't trust the government.
Yeah.
And so the kind of narrative that Rush Limbaugh is trying to craft is one that centers, well, you can trust the Trump administration, if not the deep state.
Well, the deep state, of course, the CDC, always the first place you go.
When I think of who's working with Chinese communists, I think of the CIA. I think infiltrate and control the narrative. That's what's on their little.
That's right. You missed the boat with the CDC.
If Fox News and Rush Limbaugh really want to drive the point home that coronavirus is not a big deal, they'll all get infected with it on purpose.
Yes.
And then they can show us that they're fine.
This is the basically the same thing they did with waterboarding. They all Club Gitmo.
Or when what's his name drank a glass of fracking water.
Oh my gosh.
Or Flint water. I'm sorry.
Obama. Yeah.
Obama.
Damn.
Yeah.
And I think one of the executives were.
Also, this guy is apparently a real guy, and he has a GoFundMe set up for coronavirus-related costs.
Yeah, Frank Wojcicki or something. I forget what his name is, but he's if he is a comedian, he's been fooling the media for about 2 or 3 weeks now. So
he's a crisis actor, obviously. The Dems hired Frank Wojcicki. I don't know. I can't pronounce that. To go into Fox News to try to delegitimize.
What are the rules for child crisis actors?
He's not.
Are they only allowed to be on set?
Yeah,
they're tried as adults.
This is really sad. This is coming from his Twitter. My father-in-law just died. My wife is alone in Wuhan. She can't even give her father a proper burial. I need to get her here. China has disallowed funerals as and other traditional death rites. My wife can't hold a vigil as the people at the Myanmar base have agreed to help me hold a ceremony here. Thank you. That's why he was there in Wuhan. I mean, that's an example, even though the whole family fortunately is okay, of the impact of this virus is that it's going to shut down a lot of things if it gets anywhere close to what is happening over there.
And we're a global culture now. It's we do have very, very strict regulations. Well, strict regulations on immigration, but for a lot of people, this is a global. The economy, it makes it we're a global world.
Well, that's what I was saying. They're going to go out there and they're going to say this is a function of immigrants and we got to close the border. All right, well, close the border. There is not a border, or if you're going to close the border, that means You close the entire border. You stop flights coming in from international flights.
Yeah.
You stop ships bringing in stuff, because there's merchant seamen on these boats, and they could be carrying stuff. Everything's going to dock like 7 miles out, and we'll send dinghies out there to get the the frozen carrots.
And last time I heard, our docks are incredibly poorly securitized.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I heard that.
It's always been a problem
Yeah.
since 9/11. Well, I mean, since 9/11, people have talked about it.
Well, it points to larger issues of globalization, right? Like in a very real and concrete way this time, because Trump has banked on identifying problems caused by globalization, labor issues. Obviously, he doesn't care about workers, but he's saying, oh, the jobs are going away. You guys have all these problems. We got the opioid epidemic, and saying the solution to this is closing the borders and trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube and turning us back into some sort of autarky where we make everything we need here. The left response to this has to be different. It has to be internationalist. It has to be coherent.
I actually think that the left response to this needs to be that we need to bring back some of our manufacturing here, because this is going to expose the danger of concentrating, regardless of who has it. I mean, it's adds to the problem that it's an economic rival. But I don't know any country that would basically say like, oh yeah, we don't want these other countries to have a shortage of antibiotics, so we're going to forego the antibiotics, the manufacturing capacity here for our own antibiotics, and we're going to send it there. No, we do need, I think, every country that can produce their own should be producing it on some level because of this very reason, that you have these long supply lines, you have these just-in-time production things, and it's problematic. And I think we do need the capacity to produce our own, at the very least, drugs. I mean, things that are sort of essential to national security, not in a militaristic way, but in terms of this is a national security threat. I mean, on some level.
Yeah, or maybe just like the ability to organize production worldwide in a way that makes sense, rather than having just whatever's the cheapest thing to do, which is often, like you said, these global supply chains. So like if in the case of vaccines, it makes the most sense to have a vaccine factory in every country or what have you, maybe that should be prioritized over the profits of capitalists.
Yes.
I mean, it also makes sense, I think, to your point, Jamie, that we're such a globalized world in terms of how we supply chains and movement of capital, and even movements of tourism and people, maybe not immigration from the global south to the global north, but just the movements of people for vacations and cruise ships, Scientologists or not. And so, I think that at a certain point we've tried to have a foot in the door in both. We're going to be an island. America's going to be an island. A lot of countries are going to be an island in a sea of basically just other countries. But certain things like climate change, global pandemics, they require a level of global cooperation that should be the standard and can't be mobilized quickly enough in times of crisis. I think is what my point. It's just we need to start working towards at least a level of international cooperation that would facilitate dealing with these problems that simply cannot be dealt with as individual nations can. Because the global competition between China and America is another barrier to getting people help, to keeping people from having this kind of thing.
I don't think these concepts are mutually exclusive. Exactly. In other words, if we were still producing, let's say, solar panels, which essentially, once the Solyndra became a big issue, our ability as a U.S. government to help subsidize these panels was just far outstripped by China. But that would be a good thing. And it would, in some ways, it's still a coordinated effort to fight climate change. You can have that level of coordination, but also say we need as a specific discouragement. In fact, I interviewed David Dane about this, and maybe we'll run this interview after Ring of Fire. He tells the story about his dad, a textile union rep, I think, outside of Philadelphia, going to Washington, trying to save the textile industry in the 70s, and the being told essentially by Democrats and by politicians like, look, we need this to sort of raise the standards of other people's living around the world. These industries are gonna go out there, and undoubtedly it was basically, that's the premise, but it's really about, we need to have we're gonna need to go get cheap labor and exploit the labor there more. But there was a capacity or an ability, I should say, for the U.S. government to inhibit the ability of these industries to go to China and to basically make it so that we were reliant for all sorts of goods. And that's, Stoller's piece. I can't recommend it enough. Maybe we should link to it, which is, I think it was The End of Affluence or whatnot. It's one potential scenario that could play out where we walk into stores and there are bare shelves. And suddenly the things that we take for granted in terms of like, these medications are always there, they're not there.
Yeah.
I was going to say, to your point, also to Jamie's, a way to avoid that and also to like make manufacturing back at home much more attractive that doesn't necessarily involve sort of punitive measures on other countries is to demand a certain level of quality of worker conditions in other places to drive up the cost of goods that way as well. So it can be like, if it makes less sense economically to have your factory in China because they have to pay people at a wage that isn't a slave wage, then, maybe you might just build it in Detroit again. I think you can do it from the tariff route. You can do it from like we're just going to tax it until it's the same price, or you can work globally cooperate and say, hey, you know what, China doesn't have to be a global enemy in this the 21st century rather. It can be a global partner. It can produce things there. We can produce things here, but flattening out or raising the bar or evening out the bar rather of like how workers are treated around the world can correct for this imbalance or this concentration of capital in one place. And
that was the theory with NAFTA. I mean, that's why people were mad at Bill Clinton, because NAFTA was sold to people like, we're going to do this. And then we're going to add the labor and environmental protections afterward, which are going to sort of like provide that sort of like floor, which would theoretically give us some balance. And of course, that part of it never showed up. And that was also, one of the issues that was supposedly addressed in the USMCA, and I don't think it was, frankly. All right, well, we got a couple more clips dealing with coronavirus, and then we'll move on to some stuff that's a little bit more fun. Here is at the House Ways and Means Committee, and I'm glad Democrats are doing this because they, from a political standpoint, like I said the other day, it both has the practical effect of maybe forcing the government to actually move into some form of activity that is not suppressing what we know about this into actually like doing something about it. And it also sets the predicate, because Democrats do not do this well enough and have and I believe it's a failure, just simply a partisan failure, to make it clear whose F up this is. And here is Lyle Doggett from Texas asking Alex Azar, who is the he is the Secretary of Labor, HHS, sorry. Right. And this is in the wake of the HHS whistleblower saying, like, we sent a bunch of people down to deal with these people who have been, quarantined without the proper gear. Loyal Doggett is asking Alex Azar, like, what are you guys doing?
In that regard, beginning with the question of face mask, I'm sure you saw the story that the N95 mask that is important to those who are healthcare providers, that many hospitals only had a week's supply. What is the administration doing to assure that there's an adequate supply of those masks?
We're asking you to fund us buying masks.
I see. So we don't have them now, and 60% of large chain pharmacies also say that they've run out of masks for the public.
The bottom line is, it's like, the best time to get a lawyer is when you don't need one.
Yeah.
Yeah. The best time to buy masks is before you're hit by the wave of panic of people buying masks.
Wait, so that Lyle Doggett, he's a Democrat?
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like, I don't know, my stereotype of Texas is that everyone there is named Lyle Doggett. Yeah, absolutely everyone.
Someone named Dan Crenshaw. So,
Yeah.
It's really more or less the same.
Yeah.
But I mean, no, but your point is a good one, but that's a larger point about preventative care.
Yeah.
That's a larger point about infrastructure. It's like what we're seeing with the coronavirus is that we don't have a lot of preventative care. People have been conditioned to avoid thinking of their medical state as a proactive thing because for a lot of people it's a crisis. It's always a crisis because it involves so much bureaucracy and so much, well, not everybody, obviously. Some people have health insurance, but like in the absence of that as being just like a blanket thing, it creates a crisis management mentality in a lot of people that prevents them from getting.
But that's on an individual level. But on a governmental level, we're seeing an analogy here to what we saw with FEMA, frankly, which is, during the Clinton administration, one of the things that they did very well was build up FEMA. Bush administration came in, privatized, slashed it. Because you don't need FEMA if there's not a crisis, and most of the time, there's not a crisis. But when one hits, then you're caught essentially with your pants down, and that's what's happened with the CDC. They have been underfunded because we have a government that, to the extent that Donald Trump knows what's going on, it's also being outsourced to Mike Pence, who just basically believes the Lord will take care of all of us, and we don't need to expend money on that stuff. And so when time comes where we need to be prepared for a crisis that we couldn't anticipate, we can't do that, and we're behind the 8 ball now trying to get masks for our first responders. And I should just say, for average people going around, the mask is actually for the people who have it. It's not going to necessarily prevent it, but my understanding is nitrile gloves, not a bad idea, particularly if you get on the subway a lot.
I think. Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh yeah.
Did that freak you out, Kate?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking. So you wear like plastic gloves when you're not plastic, but you wear gloves when you're on the subway.
Yeah, you don't want to get. I mean, you're going to look weird, but.
Not to change the subject, but I did comedy in China a couple years ago. And I do believe, based on that experience, that it might be there might be a lot more cases than reported because a lot of people are. Did
they consistently undercount how many people were watching your comedy?
Yes. No. It was someone was explaining to me, and I'm definitely not like an expert on China or anything, but there are a lot of people in China for some reason that don't qualify for any actually benefits that their government has. I think somebody told me there that it was like half the population. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but I think people who are like living in a different place than the one that they are supposed to live, but basically there's like half or potentially half, a lot of the population that somehow like is not accounted for there because they're living secretly in some way. This is what people explained to me when I was there. I could be wrong. I'm not a China expert. I just told dick jokes there.
There you go. Well,
yeah.
So Katie has come out as a Chi-Com agent.
Yeah. I'm a crisis actor.
Chi comedy.
Yeah.
Agent.
Tish. No, but I think your point is a good one, and it's about the crisis management aspect of our government, and it speaks to like a philosophical, at least a semi-philosophical question about like what our government is for, and like what it should be doing and what its role. And from my perspective, it's like it's supposed to be building these infrastructure. It's supposed to be building these things that exist to, in the not the fringe case of a pandemic, because a pandemic is not a fringe case. It's like there's been a lot in the history of mankind, and even if it is a fringe case, as Katie mentioned earlier, it's like the amount of devastation it could cause would make preparing for such a fringe case worthwhile, even if it is even a fringe case. So, but what it comes down to is that we've seen the very idea of governmental infrastructure be attacked by the Trump administration, by the Republicans, and sometimes by the Democrats. That the government shouldn't be doing anything. There's nothing that the government does better, or the government should only be doing that private industry should not have their hand in. But again, things like pandemics, things like quarantine, disease control, it's like private trying. Like this is what the government should be doing. This is a very visible example of how eroded our infrastructure has become around the board. People, I've used this analogy all the time. Like if you're driving on the roads, if you go outside and you're in the Midwest and your roads are unpaved and broken and like they're not being properly funded, there's a good chance, your water is also probably not so great. That the other aspects of your infrastructure are not so great, that are less visible. And so we have to start like not only rebuilding that infrastructure, but rebuilding the ideological underpinnings that support the infrastructure, which is okay. The government needs to be doing something. Right. The government has to be putting money into these things and not just sort of, I know the CDC is the second biggest, deep state front behind NASA, but the minority of money they use to actually combat diseases for optics is still important. We can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. We have to take the good with the bad there.
Well, okay, yes, I was thinking when you were saying that, like, is there a chance that people don't care at all? I was thinking about the epidemic of mass shooting in this country and how much the people, like these same people, like deny it and like in some cases make up conspiracies about it and say it's not happening and say it's not a problem and say that nothing can be done. Could we see a world where this does become a pandemic and like Republicans and Trump fans continue to deny it?
I think I always take as a baseline that 30% of the people don't care about anything that Donald Trump tells them not to care about.
Yeah.
But if it's in front of their face.
Yeah. So
I feel like that's the safest position to take, is just assume that 30% of them are just like, you're telling me it's day outside, but Donald Trump told me it's night, and I don't care what time it is, it's night.
Yeah.
And I think, I think that number is a fairly fixed number. And then I think it's just various gradations of people outside of that sort of core as you get further away that will, depending on how much it impacts them, whether it's like, oh, wait a second, part of it has to do with like, it's going to hit wealthier people first, actually, because they have the most mobility in society. They do the most amount of plane travel. They're the ones who are going to conventions that are in different places. They're the one largely going to like, to restaurants and and living in more concentrated areas. But the anxiety could reach outside of that. And then of course also, all it takes is if the post office you can't go to or whatever it is, like if you're in a more rural area or something like that, it can get more isolating on some level. So
yeah, it's a lot harder to make a conspiracy theory about something that's happening in front of people's faces and say it's not happening.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think there's going to be, it's quite possible there's going to be sufficient firsthand experience that is going to make it much harder sell than.
Yeah, that's true. People didn't have any conspiracies about there was another one a couple years ago. What is it? Bird flu, swine flu?
Swine flu.
Yeah.
But that was also a slightly different.
Yeah, that was a very different time, but.
Different time.
So, when it comes to conspiracy theories about stuff like pandemic stuff, they tend to take on a slightly different timbre. It becomes less outright denialism, which you hear with like mass shootings with like false flags, and more about sort of subverting, like this is not just an example of essentially capital and making society less capable of dealing with a pandemic, but this is a malicious actor. This is like, so it's not like, it's not fake. It's the Freemasons. It's a thing that was constructed in a lab by the Chinese, and because obviously, but like everyone mentioned, it's harder to convince people of that something didn't happen if it's happening to them, or a lot of people do exist in that framework where like, the earth is flat because I can't see the curve when I stand outside. It's like, but if someone in my family gets the flu, or if I'm constantly seeing on the news, or if I'm afraid, or someone coughed, it's always in my mind. That's a different thing. So where I think the distinction between mass shootings is that they happen in discrete communities, and the media kind of moves past it. But those communities don't forget about gun violence. It's like the communities that, the people, and we're seeing a slow radicalization of people against gun violence, against the Second Amendment, against ownership of guns, just because they happen so often and so many people are being personally affected.
I'll tell you something. If you were to take the year's amount of mass shootings and have it all happen in a 2-week period, then I think you might get to the sort of dynamic that could be taking place here. And I will say this, the Republicans and the conservatives are far better at weaponizing this. They did it with the caravan, although, granted, the caravan was, sort of fed into their narrative about immigration. But nevertheless, they created that in the run up to the election. Ebola. I don't know how much you guys remember this. I distinctly remember being on Al Sharpton's show and being asked the question of like, he was like, it was a very weird situation. There were 3 of us standing. I didn't know we go in standing. I usually don't wear pants that you really want to show on television, particularly at that time. And Crystal Ball was one of the people there, and she was on like regularly. I was just a contributor. And Al Sharpton was in a remote studio, and he says, like we're supposed to just talk about like 3 different topics or something, like one of those fast things. And the first one was like, Sam, how come the Republicans spend so much time on Ebola? And I'm like, well, and they go, oh, hold on. And they cut. Literally, like I'm looking at a camera, I'm looking at a TV where Al Sharpton was, and they cut from him to the live feed of a helicopter showing the ambulance that's taking the one nurse who was sequestered, outside in New Jersey to the airport to fly her to like Maine or something. And he repeats the question as I am looking at the ambulance from like the O.J. Simpson thing. And I'm like, well, because you're asking me that question as we're showing the image of we're feeding into it.
Yeah.
And they made a lot of hay out of Ebola. Donald Trump did. I'm sure there's tweets back there about Ebola that he's done.
Well, I mean, where I think there's a lot of overlap between Ebola and mass shootings and the coronavirus is when, like, the people, like you mentioned before, the people who are afraid are quite a valuable population. Like, just like mass shootings, the specific type of mass shootings that make people afraid are the school shootings. The random shootings that occur in, in areas where non-gang members are present. So like it's the fear of like the suburban housewife.
Right.
It's
the randomness.
It's the randomness of it. It's like, well, like I'm supposed to be protected by society.
Exactly.
And so if I'm not being protected, there must be a breakdown.
I've structured
here.
my life in a way to that I've calculated what the risks are, and I have structured my life in such a way that I avoid those. And then when you bring in an element that could just like hit me despite that, I can't even take steps theoretically to protect myself from it. All right, let's move on here to sort of more general things that are going on.
I love
this is actually pretty fun. This is a series of tweets. Apparently, Garth Brooks.
This is amazing. I love it.
Garth Brooks went on stage in Detroit with a Detroit Lions football shirt, but it didn't. I guess apparently people didn't. Well, yeah, it's clearly a Detroit Lions football shirt.
It's clearly a Barry Sanders jersey.
And Barry Sanders, of course, the famous running back from the Detroit Lions, and his number was 20. And however, in this hyper politically charged environment, Garth Brooks went on there. People assumed it was a Bernie Sanders 2020 shirt.
That would be so amazing.
Well, so Bernie Sanders so associated with the Detroit Lions,
yes.
Much more so than Barry Sanders. And apparently people freaked out about it, which really sort of undercuts the whole idea of like, there's like this crossover between country and, are you ready for some football?
I'm not sure, but I feel like, Garth Brooks is a very rich man. He $350 million, so a Bernie Sanders endorsement would be unexpected there. But I think he might actually be one of these secret Democrats.
He's friends with Lil Nas X. I don't know if that means anything about his politics, but he is cool.
Yeah, well, so maybe he did really mean it. Some of these just say, go back to the other one. He says, somebody responds, hey, love you, hate the shirt, Trump 2020. Weird that a millionaire would like a socialist. Hey, Garth, are you going to distribute your millions? This is all just based upon a Sanders 20 shirt. No thanks, Trump 2020. Sanders, really? So out of touch. If that's a Bernie shirt, I just lost a lot of respect for you. Sanders, don't care about your politics, love your music. Let's keep politics and your entertainment separate.
That's so funny.
I don't think
people because he was trying to show respect for Detroit. And he was trying
exactly.
He probably doesn't even like Barry Sanders or he's like, oh yeah, who the
hell is Barry Sanders? Whatever, just put the shirt on.
Some stylist probably gave it to him. Like
nothing like supporting a communist to loss a few fans. That's the whole literacy thing. We get back a full circle.
These people all have the exact names that I would think that they would. Chris A, Brittany, Jen, Soccer Mama. I mean,
how about going to a successful socialist country and doing some research? Oh, yes, you can't because there aren't any successful socialist countries.
there's definitely got to be a comment or two
Got 'em.
about Venezuela.
Why don't you do your country music in Venezuela?
Yeah.
If this is truly Garth, very sad. You just lost a fan, Trump 2020. How much did they pay you to do this, Garth?
This is amazing.
Good grief. Can't you just get paid to do what you do? Why does it always have to involve politics?
I mean, it is going to be wild because when, like, let's say Bernie Sanders is the candidate in a general election, I would imagine that a lot of celebrities will support him, even ones that are now. And I would imagine that would include, a lot of country stars, football players. I mean, like, definitely people who are going to have their fan bases mad.
I don't know if he dresses himself for concerts. I would guess a stylist probably picked that shirt out for him. So it's possible a stylist it's definitely got fired, but was making a political statement. We won't know unless he wears like a Mao jersey at his next concert.
That's right.
It's like a Mao basketball
Comes out
jersey.
in a green, what do you call it? Those Nehru jackets.
You never heard of Jeffrey Mao, the center of the 1968 center of the Houston Rockets? Oh my God.
He just comes out like next week with like an Epstein didn't kill himself shirt or something.
A reliable source does tell me that Chris Gaines is a Bernie bro, though. I don't know if anybody.
I heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
There's
go.
a duality in us all.
Who's this guy?
Chris Gaines is Garth Brooks' alter ego when he tried to cross over.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I was going to say, why are we putting up a picture of Brandon Straka after being...
I thought that was, what's his face?
The Mind Freak?
Yeah, Chris Angel.
They've got the same soul patch.
Yeah, I thought that was maybe the guy from Third Eye Blind, but I wasn't
Or
sure.
like the
They're
third
all the
property
same
brother.
guy.
Let's do the DeVos, and then I want to do the Diamond Silk. I'm sorry, I know that's people are like, why? But I want to. Here is Betsy DeVos just reminding everybody how horrific Michael Bloomberg is. He has championed the charter movement, and here it is.
A great job for the families that are choosing them, and there are a million
Madam
families
Secretary.
on the wait list
Madam
to go to
Secretary,
charter
just
schools.
talking over someone isn't an answer, just so you know. And yes or no often is when it's asked in a yes or no format. We also know that on the same group gave such incomplete information over 3 years, didn't report accurate information, reported no information on performance data. Would you give your staff a paycheck if they didn't perform 84% of their tasks? Yes or no?
Of course not. But
Thank you for
everything
answering it
you're
in a yes or
citing,
no. That's
everything
progress.
you're citing is debunked ridiculous. So
No,
I don't accept the
it's
premise
actually-
of
it's
your
actually-
question.
Well, it's actually not. Let me ask you this. Do you think it's odd when people think your family runs a charter, correct? That's a yes or no.
No.
Your husband doesn't have a charter program?
He founded a charter
He
school.
founded a charter. So when people think that you may have a conflict of interest because of that,
Absolutely not.
I'll let you not do a yes or no. You can respond however on that.
I will respond in that my husband founded a charter school,
she's
which is
bread-fixing her.
meeting needs of students all over West Michigan. And he is on the board, but he does not run the school. It is organized as a not-for-profit charter school, and it is a public school serving all comers.
Well, Madam Secretary, I think just the fact that you couldn't answer yes or no when you look at this terrible rating of charter schools, this is why people have a worry that there could be a conflict or something else.
You're
because
wrong
if they're,
about
they're not
charter
performing
schools.
academically, yeah, but if 40% are closing down that you're giving grants to,
That is
that's a
not
waste of
true.
public
That has
resources.
been a totally debunked report. It was nothing but propaganda by an individual who has an in for charter schools.
So what percent of charter schools are failing? Do you have an idea? A number?
I
Any
don't
number?
have a state.
You're the Secretary of Education and you don't have this? You know this report's
Charter
wrong, but you
schools
don't
are
have a number.
chartered by states.
Yeah,
They are not chartered by the federal
You know
government.
that number's not right, but you don't have a correct number. Is that what you're telling
What
me?
I know is parents and families
So you
are
don't know.
choosing to
So you
send their
don't know the
children to
answer.
charter schools.
That's a yes.
Yeah.
You can just say the most horrible stuff, but as long as you throw parents and families in there, people are just like, all right, I'll accept it.
My husband does not fix bread for our prices. He works for a company that founded a company that fixes bread prices. I mean, like, yeah, the choice argument, that was so funny. Like, families are choosing to send their kids to failing charter schools.
Yeah,
Like,
parents and families can choose.
they're making the rational choice to send your
Well,
kids.
because if your kids learn to read, then they then become
Communist.
And people, which is such a misconception because obviously people become radicalized through podcasts.
First you learn,
right, of course.
Yeah.
First you learn to read, then you learn to read Chinese,
Yeah.
then you learn to be a communist. And that's the flow chart.
I mean, the fact is that there are instances, narrow ones, very narrow ones, where charter schools are better, but no better than the law of averages.
Yeah.
And if you were to pour that type of resources into any given public school, then you would see that same type of, at the very least, that rate, if not better. And the fact is that everyone knows this is a backdoor way of trying to privatize schools. And it is, I interviewed recently a supporter of charters who embedded at the Success Academy for a couple of years and still comes out and admits, after writing the books, basically says, well, it is true. They don't cherry pick the students as much as they cherry pick the parents. And people can go back and listen to that interview because there's also a lot of assumptions he's making that are just sort of like decisions that parents make as to whether they're going to like pick up their kid at 3. They got to be with the program. But of course, a lot of parents aren't. And his argument is like, look, rich people have the opportunity to choose to go to private schools. Why can't poor people make that choice through these charters? And it's a way to get vouchers, as opposed to the idea of like, you are necessarily going to limit always who has access to a good education unless you take those resources and add more to them and make all of the schools raise the quality of all of them. And she, of course, is very much against that.
And of course, charter schools, charter schools as opposed to public schools, like they have the ability to lobby in their own favor. They have the ability to lobby a government to allow for certain things to go on. We know, I believe it was in Louisiana, like post Katrina,
almost all of them.
The entire parish counties schools were privatized. Of course, the poor counties schools were privatized, and the richer adjacent county schools were not fully privatized, but they were privatized. And not only were they privatized, not only were they made into charter schools, but the standards were forcefully lowered in order to give the impression that the schools were doing better than they actually were. And so public schools don't have that ability. I mean, they can of course, advocate in their own favor at school boards and, et cetera, but they don't have the same ability to just pour money into lobbying to have the metrics change to make it appear as though they're doing better. And then you have the cherry picking of parents or students who are most active, which gives off the illusion that hey, public schools are failing and charter schools are doing better. But you're just, again, not law of averages, but you're removing you are taking the people who would necessarily balance out the sort of the failure rates at public schools and putting them all in one place, which gives off the express picture that public schools do worse. Right.
All right, we have one more clip that we'll play. I wanted to find, there's a great video of a miner, a retired miner, South Carolina, I believe, who spoke at a Bernie thing. And I thought I had. Was it? Oh, maybe that was. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Here is Diamond and Silk. Now, we established, Diamond is wearing the black dress and Silk is wearing the red. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
You think so?
I don't know.
They always stand the way that it would be.
Yeah, if it's going by, this is usually how they're oriented, so I think that's right.
I've only ever heard them referred to as like a pair. So I will admit I don't know which each one is who.
Well, I'll tell you why it sticks out for me. I mean, they're at CPAC. They're going around. I at one point, very early in my career, would do a duo bit with John Benjamin. And so I know how tenuous comedy bits are. Diamond and Silk bit.
Just call yourselves that.
Well, the
Fry and Laurie, Diamond and Silk,
Yeah.
you know.
And what's really clear here is that Silk is completely drafting off of Diamond's work. And Diamond is having a tough time of it, and Silk doesn't seem to care. She's just like, Silk is just, all she does is just repeat what Diamond says.
She's a hype woman.
Yeah, and it just seems like wrong to me. But here they are at CPAC, just wowing the crowd and making it clear. And then sort of almost inadvertently adopting the Obama campaign slogan of 2008. Here it is.
The last 4 letters in Democrats. Yeah. Rats. R-A-T-S. Yeah. And the symbol happened to be a donkey. Did y'all know that? Their symbol is a donkey. Yeah. Oh, but to you Democrats. You may make an ass out of you. But you won't make an ass out of us. No, you won't. No, you won't. You won't do that.
Flowetry has
Not to
gone really
us.
downhill since the 90s.
You can keep your free stuff. Keep it. Because we don't want it. That's right. Now, the last 4 letters.
Now look at, pause it for 1
Republican,
second. Hold on for a second. I'm sorry. Go back just a little bit. She's having to read this off a script.
Oh my God.
Now, maybe like I could see doing like, like a bullet, points to just remember, like, after you talk about the Democrats, talk about the Republicans. But do you really need to read the slip to know what the last 4 letters of Republicans are?
I'm going to put it this way. Spliff Star didn't have notes when he was hype man for Busta Rhymes. And Busta Rhymes raps incredibly fast. She's speaking at a very, decent pace. So, I was going to say, like, obviously we've seen since the.
But I'm saying Diamond needs to remind herself about the Republicans.
Diamond is
She's wearing the black dress.
Okay, yeah.
So watch her now as she moves. She just pointed out to everybody that Democrats' last 4 letters are rats,
Like
which is
Buttigieg.
incidentally why the ethically and follically challenged Frank Luntz actually focus group this was because saying Democrat instead of the Democratic Party, like the rat thing resonated. And so they caught up to this 20 years later,
Gotcha.
and they're actually deconstructing it.
That's why I call them the repubes instead of Republicans.
Yes.
I got to be honest with you. During my days on AM Talk Radio, I would refer to them as the Republicans, instructive of what they were doing to the public.
Whoa,
at that time.
canceled.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Fortunately, none of the audio from that time exists. But here, watch how she has to check her notes to remind herself what the last 4 letters of Republicans are.
Oh, you won't. You can keep your free stuff. Keep it. Because we don't want it. That's right.
Check notes.
Now, the last 4 letters in Republican is I can. I can. Think about it, y'all. Think about it. I can. Yeah.
Now pause it. Now, why is Democrat in Democrats in plural and Republican is in just one is in a singular?
I'm gonna be honest with you. Like, it's easy to look down on Diamond and Silk because they're like bad at their job, but really it's the audience. Like they don't prepare. They don't care. It's like the audience will just take whatever they say.
Of
course. It's why we can only.
Dude, this is I'm not a racist card that they're getting from these two.
I could only hope to have a job as easy as Diamond and Silk's has.
Yeah. Well, that's my whole point. It's really Silk has the easiest job. Diamond, she's the one who has to say the first line. But Silk is just up there drafting them.
I wonder if they get paid the same.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, well.
Silk brings a level of enthusiasm to it, though. Like look, it's like comedy. You have the writers and you have the performers, and most people do a mix of both. But with Silk, she's clearly more of a performer. Diamond's more of the writer.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
So, all right, let's let it roll. I want to show some respect here. Sorry.
I can't think for myself.
She's
I
repeating
can
everything.
pull myself up by my bootstraps. Yes, I can.
And doing sign language too.
I can obtain the American dream. Yes, I can.
I love the fact that Silk is just repeating everything that Diamond's saying, which is literally, I can think for myself. Yes, I can.
Yeah.
I mean, they're a team. I mean, look, honestly, it's hard. I mean, they're not my preferred content creators, but like, it's hard not to look up to them as having like just like the perfect grift going. It's like, you know, well, I said it before, but this is like, that's my retirement plan, essentially. It's just like, when I turn 45, I say something offensive online, people yell at me. I've been ousted from the left. 2 days later, I'm on Dave Rubin. I'm on Fox News. You know, I have like a MAGA hat or some nonsense. I'm not a Republican. I'm just a critic of the left. Next month, I have a show on Fox News. I don't have to read anymore. I can, except for the notes, like the bullet points that my hype man brings me. It's great. I call it retirement. It's wonderful.
Oh, that's good.
This is the life that I want for everyone, really. As a communist, I don't want to take it away from Diamond and Silk. I want to hold them up as an example of the kind of low work society that we could all live in if we pull together.
I stand low effort queens. Like, you know, low effort
in
queens.
Jamie's fantasy world, Diamond and Silk are on stage looking out at a sea of Diamond and Silks who are all talking back to them at the same, you know, they're all just doing their own, everybody takes a turn and does the exact same bit.
Yeah, and then they go home and get high. It's great.
Again, though, like that crowd, they love this. Yeah. It's like they are so happy to be there. That room is probably packed, and they are so happy to be there. Diamond and Silk is doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, being there, talking crap about the Democrats. You know, like being black at CPAC.
Exactly.
It's just like, you know, everyone's happy, everyone wins. It's, you know, it's hard to. We don't have a lot of pure grifters anymore. A lot of people are out there. A lot of people are out there trying to craft like private equity schemes. You know, Diamond and Silk, just pure snake oil saleswomen.
Yeah, you got to appreciate that. You got to appreciate it, and they don't even have to like the overhead is just virtually nil.
I mean, I'm sure their dresses are nice. I'm sure they cost money.
Yeah, it definitely like women's clothing, that kind of stuff. It's more expensive than you think.
All right, well, fair enough. So that's it for Diamond and Silk, and folk, that is it for our time today on this program. We will be back on Monday, and on Tuesday, of course, we will be covering the results from Super Tuesday. Brandon Sutton, pretty bad lefty on Twitter, and the Discourse,
the host of the Discourse,
I'm
still interviewing for my own Silk personally, or Diamond. I don't know. Maybe I'm Silk. Maybe maybe we're all Silk, and we just want to be Diamond.
That's basically what really life is all about: is finding out, are you the Diamond or are you the Silk?
The two genders.
Kate Willett's on Reply Guys, which is the show that you host. Are you the Diamond or are you the Silk?
Ooh, you know, I think I might be the Silk, honestly.
Really?
Yeah. Julia is, she knows what she's talking about.
Does Julia know that you're the Silk?
I think so. I mean, look, it's, you know, we kind of take turns, like any good relationship. It's like, even if one person like has a thing that they kind of predominantly fall into, like we keep it versatile, you know? So, yeah, but we've been interviewing a lot of, leftist candidates for office around the country, a lot of people that are running for Congress, mostly women, to kind of spotlight certain races that people might not know about, and that has been really fun.
Who've been your favorites?
We just interviewed Heidi Sloan in Austin, and she was awesome. Her race, I think, is March 3rd, and we interviewed Jen Perelman, who is running for Debbie Wasserman Schultz's seat, and she was really, really cool. I hope she wins because she is running on a climate action platform that would probably be really helpful to the people in Florida.
And what about, have you ever interviewed Morgan Harper?
I haven't interviewed Morgan, but that would be amazing.
Yes, you should interview her. I've done some of those progressive candidates too. She was very impressive in Ohio. All right, folks, check out Reply Guys, and I guess you can find your clip on Colbert.
Yeah, and I'm at Kate Willett on Twitter with 2 L's and 2 T's.
There you go. All right, folks.
Thank you.
See you on Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.